Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the City of Palm Coast City Council workshop this morning. Today is Tuesday, September the 12th, 2023. It's 9 a.m. and we are in the community wing of City Hall. With that, I would ask you to please rise and join me in our Pledge of Allegiance. Following the pledge, you are welcome to remain standing for a moment of silence to reflect, meditate, pray, or pause for a moment. I know we've had many prayers to share over these last couple of days, so thank you for this morning. I would ask for the roll call, please.
Mayor Alphen.
Present.
Vice Mayor Danko.
Here.
Councilmember Hyder.
Present.
Councilmember, Councilmember Clufus.
Present.
Councilmember Pontieri.
Present.
All members are present.
We now move to public participation. This is a workshop. Public participation will be offered at the beginning and the end of the agenda today. In order for city staff to be able to respond to your questions or concerns, please fill out a comment card with your contact information. The comment cards can be found on the table near the agendas or available from the Communications Marketing Director in the back of the room. Anyone wishing to speak may approach the podium, provide their name, and may speak for up to 3 minutes. Please direct all comments to the mayor. Be concise and to the point. Avoid delaying or interrupting the proceedings, and do not make any irrelevant, impertinent, or slanderous comments. Any person who becomes disorderly may be barred from making any additional comments and may be removed. With that, I would open up the podium for any members of the public who would like to address me and City Council at this time. Yes, sir.
Good morning, Robin McDonald, Palm Coast. At last week's marathon city meeting, I raised a couple of questions and I got some answers, but I walked out of here scratching the back of my head because I wasn't sure about the answers. So I thought maybe that the question was misunderstood, so I figured I'd give it another shot. The question came up at last week's meeting about hiring an actuary, not an attorney, an actuary. And when I asked what the actuary was going to do for the city, I was told that it wasn't for public comment. Now, I'm not an attorney, I'm far from it. But in my opinion, if the public is not entitled to it, it usually being the key word, it usually means that we're possibly in contract negotiations or personnel matters or something to that magnitude. I don't know why we couldn't get an answer what the actuary was going to be paid for. My second question was, when I asked how much the actuary was going to get paid, Mayor Alphen looked down the table and asked the city manager, and the city manager said $25,000. Well, I got a problem with that. First of all, according to what I've been told, and I may be incorrect, the city manager has the authority to spend up to $50,000 of our money because it's the right thing to do. So she doesn't have to ask for city council approval. So, that being said, if the amount is only $25,000, this shouldn't even came up for discussion. She should have just wrote the check for $25,000 to the actuary and called it a day. So, again, I don't understand what the money's for. I got a good idea. But I'd like the city to tell the rest of the residents what the actuary is going to do for the city and what the actual cost is going to be. Is it going to be the $25,000 that the city manager said it was going to be? Or is it going to be in addition to possibly the $50,000 that the city manager is allowed to spend? Maybe we've exceeded that again and she needs another $25,000. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your comment. Mr. McDonald, I'm going to ask the council to go ahead, and do you want to get with the resident after, or do you want to go through it now?
I can. Either it's at the pleasure,
If
whatever you
it's,
want.
if it's quick and a summary, fine, and then you can follow up afterwards. Go ahead.
Sure. The hiring of the actuary is for the labor negotiations that the city's in right now. We can't tell you any more than that because labor negotiations are confidential. The actuary is preparing numbers in a report in addition to the report they already provided. They already provided a report that kicked off the negotiations with the labor union. That report was completed. However, there's been, as you know, with negotiations back and forth, there's been additional work that's necessary from the actuary. So since it was exceeding the city manager's $50,000 threshold, it had to come to city council for an additional sum of money. We don't know exactly what that is. What the approval was for was $25,000, not to exceed $25,000. So we don't know if it's going to cost that much, but it won't cost more than that at this point for the additional work that's being done. And that's really all I can say about it, because like I said, labor negotiations are confidential, so that's all we can tell you as far as what they're doing. We can't tell you exactly what they're doing.
Okay, thank you. Is there another speaker that would like to make public comment? I'm sorry, Mr. McDonald, if you'd like to follow up with the city manager or council afterwards, that would be fine if that doesn't get you to your answer. Yes, sir.
Morning, Jeffrey Seib. The Land Development Code, or LDC, was established as the regulations for developers to follow in their building plans. In the past, when a developer wanted a change in the original plan's compliance with the LDC, they would ask the city for a variance. Now we see more and more requests by developers and their agents to increase housing density, eliminate or substitute residential for commercial designated properties, and alter the LDC specified initial property design. At a recent city council meeting, a question was raised about why we even have an LDC when every large development doesn't want to follow it. The mayor answered that the LDC is a living document and should adjust to the times we are in and the particular project coming in for approval. I don't think that's what's happening here. If that were truly the way it's done, we all would be on board with this. The fact of the matter is that in all the developments coming in asking for changes, the direction of those changes is always one way, towards greater density, more units, less wetlands and landscaping, less commercial units, everything the developer wants. If the LDC is to be flexible and living in the sense of allowing changes in the regulations, then this would result sometime, someday, the changes to go in both directions. That means to have their request for greater densities approved, the developer would have to provide features that would counter or obscure the increased densities. Some of these are more landscaping, more trees, more shrubs, more lawn area, and open spaces. An example of a large development that got it right are the Pine Lakes Apartments at the corner of Belterre and Pine Lake Parkways. Another positive change in the LDC would be to require, where applicable, the developer increase the wetland buffer distance to the more scientifically accurate, and realistically protective area of 50 feet with no averaging. If we are to agree that the concept of a living LDC, then the council should direct the city manager and the staff people responsible to take into consideration that it goes both ways and require an increase in the natural landscape density. The council should then consider these facts when deciding on project approvals. If developers want their changes, this is what they have to do. If not, then follow the Land Development Code as written.
Thank you for comment, Mr. Saib. Mr. Saib, I would invite you, please, to participate in the upcoming opening of our comprehensive plan, of which the LDC will be a focal point, and we would appreciate your comments there as well. So thank you.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, in that regard,
Not a conversation. I'm just offering that as a way forward.
some years ago, the Chapter 11 landscaping regulations of the Land Development Code were changed, and I was involved.
Good. Thank you. Okay. Next speaker, please. Seeing no one come forward, I will close public comment at this time, and we will move forward unless any comments from City Council? This time, good, thank you. Then we'll move forward with our first presentation.
Good morning, Council. Doug Akins, IT Director. Over the past few months, there have been some tower-related items that have come before Council, and out of that, a question came up about what the coverage in the city of Palm Coast was really like. Diamond Communications, who has built several towers in the city, heard that question and offered to come bring their data with them and answer it. So with this morning is, we have Dan Turnpaw from Diamond Communications, Tony Sabatino, Dominic Bulwa, and Rob Leonard, and they're here to present to you on the coverage in Palm Coast.
Good morning, gentlemen. So please proceed, and hopefully you'll generate some questions from us, transmit some questions from us.
Thank you, Mayor. You gonna drive for me?
Yeah, I got it.
Good. Well, today I've prepared a presentation, so I'll just walk right in, and I'm open to questions, Mayor, however you want. Thanks for having us today. Go ahead, Dan. So what we've done is each and every one of you have, I would assume, have a wireless device, whether it's a Samsung or an Apple or something else like that. Those phones today, what's happened with the new standard in wireless technology is those phones have the capability to report information back to different systems. And so that's called crowdsourced data, and there's companies that collect that data and provide massive amounts of data value. Years ago, we used to have to drive networks to figure out how an area like Palm Coast would work. Now we rely on crowdsourced data pretty well that goes ahead and gives you that information and tells how well the network covers, utilizing engineering standards such as radial signal reference point. That's about as technical as I'm going to get. What's important for us is there's a level where that needs to be when you have reliable coverage or unreliable coverage. I'm going to walk through those things for Palm Coast, and what we've done is we've looked at Palm Coast, we've measured the whole city boundary, assessed those city boundaries, and identified some significant coverage areas, and I'll represent those. We evaluated coverage at different levels, and between good and bad coverage. We'll show you those maps that you can go ahead and look at it, and explain the concept of how we see Palm Coast being an older community. It's kind of nice to see your history on the wall there, and really look at the comparative analysis. So I'll walk through those. We don't have very many slides. We have more reference information you can look at. So Dan, next slide. So there's three views of coverage, and what they are is reliable coverage has a signal level of neg 100. Unreliable it's worse than that, and the lower the negative number, the worse it gets, even though it's a higher number in hundreds, but it's negative. AT&T service, Verizon service, and T-Mobile service is what I've evaluated. They're the top three carriers in the U.S., representing about 340 million customers around the U.S. Next. So here's the explanation, and this chart is very simple. When you're at this neg 100, that means cell edge. What does that mean? A cell edge means it's at the edge of what a cell site can cover, a tower or that location. And we find those. That means it's unreliable coverage. You walk into a building, maybe good in your car as you're outside pedestrian, but when you walk outside or walk into a building or you go into a garage, coverage may be challenged. And that's what we've given. So there's a little, again, something for you to reference later as you have this information. So we'll walk into Palm Coast coverage areas. And so what we've done is I've looked at in the top left of your screen, you'll see AT&T, you'll see Verizon, you'll see T-Mobile. I've got a better, this is just kind of the whole coverage boundary. This is what engineers, these guys and gals, look at their networks from the carrier side and say, okay, how well are things? The important thing in this coverage is I've broken this down to show good and bad in a minute here. But that when you start getting into the colors of the orange, the dark orange, the red, and the black, those are poor coverage areas. So if we go to the next slide, what I've done is I've given you the availability. This is what we call reliable coverage in Palm Coast. The white on the map represents the boundary, the city boundary of Palm Coast, and then the pretty much greenish and yellow area represents what we call reliable coverage. Those areas, you can ensure that coverage is very well. It doesn't say there's not coverage in those other areas, it just says it's not as reliable in the area. This represents of the geographic area about 14, 15% of the city.
So, if I may, so you invited questions. So when you say 14 or 15% of the city, is that, maybe this is a silly question, but are you talking geographically or households?
Geographically.
So geographically.
It's not population. I did not do a population density on this.
So, I mean, just taking a quick look, I mean, I've seen this before, it looks like less than 50% of the residential dwelling units in the city of Palm Coast have what you would call reliable coverage. Is that, am I looking at the map correctly?
I would say that'd be accurate, Mayor.
Okay.
And to continue on to that discussion, what I consider reliable coverage, you're really getting the bandwidth, you know, now handsets are like mini computers with all the data you can get and all. Those are the things that are sacrificed on. So we'll walk into.
And if I may, just to footnote what we just said, so it's not confusing, many people at home probably use some kind of a cable connector and therefore have the advantage of Wi-Fi within their dwelling unit.
Yes, sir.
But this is different. This is if you were outside in your front yard and you were far enough away from the Wi-Fi so it wouldn't work, 50% of our folks might not have reliable coverage in their backyard.
Right, and it's a good point you bring up. Wi-Fi calling is, you may realize you go into your house and all of a sudden your phone, you know, answers well, but you're on Wi-Fi. Your phone just, why does my phone keep on going to Wi-Fi even though I shut up? That's a network status system that says redirect to a known network. Once you go ahead and put your password in, whether the carrier is, they will remember that. The problem is, one thing to talk about is a normal wireless network and a reliable coverage has a 99.99% reliability, which means the call's connected that much. It's less than a fraction of a percent failure. Wi-Fi calling is a 20% failure, so it's not always a highly reliable asset. So, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, next
I
slide.
have a question, I'm sorry.
Yes.
It's kind of related to the last slide as well, thank you. Have you all taken into consideration when you come up with that percentage, that 14 to 15%, the areas of our city that are wetlands, preserves, close to the water, places that just, you're never going to get great coverage because geographically we just can't put towers close or the ecosystem just won't support it?
I have not filtered the data, which could be done very easily. We have not filtered the data to go back and take the wetlands areas like to the east, right? You know, we have not factored those in. So the real question would be what percent of that 14% is what we call wetlands that really are protected and you really can't get to them? Couldn't answer that.
Just because when we look at this high level and more robustly determining what we actually need, I would like to see that data so that we're not, you know, we're looking at realistically what percentage-wise we can improve, and we're giving that data correctly to our residents. Because if there's just areas that are never going to see great coverage because of what they are, I think that's something that we do need to consider.
Well, you know, you raise a good point because like I say, it's unreliable. Wetlands, if you're just pedestrian and all, you just need to get a signal, you're probably okay, right? A communication signal or something like that. That can be very easily done.
Okay.
What you're talking about is what is the population? Good question, talking about the population. I normally do that though.
And if I could just piggyback on that, I thought that was a very good point, specifically because a lot of these areas that, the Palm Coast reliable coverage areas that aren't highlighted here, if you look at the Verizon coverage area, up north, there's a big gap, but that's undeveloped area, so there's not actually network data coming back from devices in that area, right? Even though I bet you if I stood out there, if I have coverage all around me, shouldn't I have coverage in the middle of that area?
You should, but what we can do is we can actually check sample points and find out valid, invalid, kind of no report or not.
Oh, sure. I bet you that there's just nobody in the woods up there, and that's probably why there's no data points from it.
Highly likely.
Yeah.
Highly likely. However, what we can do is also we can check the signal coverage of the assets that are there, right? So it's not just a comprehensive view of crowdsourced data. We can also see these sites in the area. And I'll show you a slide that shows all the geographic vertical assets that are in the area and how many Verizon has.
And my only caution is, as much as we respect our wetlands and all of the areas that will never be developed residentially, We do sport the best trail system and kayaking areas, probably anywhere in the region, if not the state. I want to make sure that none of our folks that are using any of our amenities are left unsafe without some available coverage to call for emergency assistance should they need it.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. And so what we've done now is pinpointed areas where it could be unreliable in these areas. And that's just showing, again, the signal levels. It's a good point to kind of think through, just because you have cell coverage, but then you have capacity as well. High density areas are also at risk, right? So when you go to high, whereas based on your example, it's a good point. You know, if you've got a smaller area, somebody get there, they could get coverage. When we say unreliable, it's not what you're experiencing today, but you still could make a call. We can find out. I can do a blackout math to say there is no coverage in these areas, which is kind of the worst case. So there's a view of unreliable again for your reference. It's in the data. So then what we do is we'll show you, basically what we've done here is we've gone in with Palm Coast. We've just shown you where everybody is. Where is AT&T today? Where is Verizon? And where is T-Mobile? And by the way, we have Verizon in the process of installing on another asset that's already existing in the city, and that takes a little bit of time. And the way the carriers work is the carriers have just finished their build for next year, right? So they know what they're going to build next year and what's in their budget. Florida, the whole state of Florida, uniquely got probably a higher percentage than all states in the country from Verizon's budget this year. But the carriers, you know, they're not building as much as they used to, just because they've got these massive levels of builds nationwide. The wireless industry spends about $30 billion a year on capital infrastructure every year. That's AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, US Southern, and Dish. That's what they spend on developing and growing their network. So there's always a need. What we've done here is we've just kind of given you a level. On the next slide, as we go to Dan, we'll just kind of show you the comparison, kind of some other cities. So what we've done is we've looked at areas like Northport, Port St. Lucie, Palm Bay, Palm Coast, and Deltona. And we'll go ahead and give you the slide right here. So we looked at reliable. So there was a comparison. Again, you can reference this. So I showed you the unreliable and reliable, and then I've got a slide walks into the presentation. So what we just did is a ranking based on signal levels and all. And these are close, right, on signal levels as far as how well T-Mobile performs, how well AT&T performs, how well Verizon performs in these communities. And I will show you an example here in a minute of a best-in-class city, you know, what to expect, okay? And then, so what we did is we got some more suburban areas. These are big cities, right? And just to let you know, there are, if you look at sampling these cities of about 500,000 to 750,000 people in population, AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon, the square mileage basically drives how many square miles of cell site covers, but then that's just for pure coverage. And the way they've developed over the years is through a capacity model. So the way it used to work is that you just build like an umbrella coverage, right, just to cover the city, because a lot of people didn't use it. When we first launched Miami, we had hardly any customers back in the late 90s, right? So you really didn't need a lot of sites. But as you develop a network, you get more people utilizing the network like we have today, you have to have more density of sites as well. So it's a density and coverage model that drives through this. So this is an example of a best-in-class in the suburban area in general. And best-in-class is a signal level, what they call neg 95, again, not to get too technical.
I have a question on this one, sorry.
Yes.
It looks like what you've listed here is for the figure of 95 or better.
Yes.
But when we go back up to above where it says Florida City Coverage Assessment, the chart that was up
Neg 100.
previous, it doesn't look like any of the cities are hitting that mark.
Correct.
So I guess my question is, why base the square miles per site on a figure that doesn't seem to be realistic for comparable cities in the state?
Well, and if you'll look at this, that's best in class at neg 95. I used neg 100 as the baseline for what we call reliable coverage. Typically, we'll call best in class at neg 95 or better as a company that rates kind of like a J.D. Powers study and all. The company's called Root Metrics, and they drive that best in class. And best in class is you are the best operator at that level. That's just referencing the best in class coverage.
Okay.
But the 100 is pretty fair. It's cell edge, and you should be able to be in good shape with that.
So do we know what the square mile coverage for each of these carriers is based on the 100 figure?
I can get it. Yeah, I'll take the action. I can get that back to you.
Great, thank you.
I sure can. Okay, next. This is just the coverage assessment. This is the backup for the information that we talked about for the other cities on the ranking. So that's just a follow-up. Next. And then it's just, again, the follow-up documentation. So really what we've done is, I think that's it. Everything else is just appendixes. Yeah. This shows a coverage area for like an area like Kissimmee, so you can see how it lights up. And an example on how that particular city is covered. And that's a city that's gone through development over the years. They've been able to incorporate, it's a newer built city, the way they've kind of put in their sites and all. Again, for your reference. And really, the whole point is, thanks for inviting us here. We just wanted to walk you through what cell coverage looks like in the community. And you're not much different than some of the smaller like communities that we got from Doug to say, hey, these are communities that are like us in the particular area. And as you have the development since the 70s on how this community is developed, it's always tough to kind of come in when a technology comes in. We really started launching this technology in the middle 90s, wireless technology. So you've got existing communities. It's much more difficult. What we're doing across the country is we're working with developers today to include wireless and telecommunications into the community in the planning group. And that's one thing I recommend you, as you start building out the western portion, figure out how you incorporate in the community day one. So when you're doing sewers, water, streets, power, also start considering the telecommunication piece.
Okay. Is that pretty much your
Yeah, that's it. And the rest of this is all appendix on the data
Okay.
for all the cities.
So I have two questions. And the first one is, and for city manager, I'm going to ask, because I don't think it would be fair to ask the question right now, is if you could get sheriff and fire together with these folks, because I would like to hear back, it doesn't have to be at a meeting, if you can update us all, where are their sore spots? In other words, I'm concerned because there's no part of this presentation that indicates that first responders have blanked out or difficult areas, and I would need to be sure that they have a communication available to them wherever and whenever they need it. So that's one, unless you already know the answer to that, but I don't think, okay. So that's very important to me. Then the other question I have, and this is, I'm really gonna put your toes to the fire here, but I gotta ask the question. I just read an article recently that they're going to be putting up not 30, but up to 70,000 Starlink satellites in the coming years. So the question becomes, should a city our size look for a network like that in the future? And I understand that may not be your business model, but it's a question that I have to ask. Is the Starlink type system something to look at for the future?
Well, satellite communications has a great place. One of the problems that you have with satellite communications right now is there is a delay. So if you've got a text message and all, and even the most recent one on the announcement is T-Mobile launching in partnership with the SpaceX program on launching their nationwide spectrum. But it does not have the capability or capacity with it.
So it's a capacity thing in the present time, okay.
And also delay. I mean, it's basically a true delay within the satellite communication network. It's getting better. Great wins on the satellite side because it's helping Ukraine today on what's being done. And I can pass on to Doug and to the council, I have a comprehensive view on satellite systems. To put into perspective, the satellites that are launched today cover an average of about 350,000 square miles.
Okay, because city council is charged with looking at plans, not just for, the coming fiscal year and budget, but for 5 years, 10 years, and actually 20 years out. So it would be wrong for us not to, get some information from you all if that's important.
I just did a presentation with the wireless associations, about 3 or 4 across the country, and I have that on it to kind of explain the difference between the LEO satellites with SpaceX, what AT&T's doing, what Verizon is, what T-Mobile, they're all doing. Your handsets, if you've got an iPhone 20, if you've got a Samsung 20 or the most recent version of the iPhone, they have satellite capability built into those handsets. You'll start seeing that flexibility coming next year.
Okay,
You'll be able to use it.
So I would go to city council now. Individual members, questions based on the presentation?
No, my questions were more regarding the satellite failover technology and things like that. But my question, I would say, is more holistic. Do you see the investment from these providers being lessened in exchange for the potential opportunity that the satellites offer? Basically, are they going to slow their investment on the physical space where they would rather invest into satellite technologies just for expectation management for just basically industry trends?
I don't see the slowing. What I see is the incorporation of, it's really one thing the carriers have done, having been there for many years prior to where I'm at right now, is the carriers have always wanted to give their customer, unfeathered access wherever they can. And what the satellite does, it gives them access at Mount Rainier, it gives them access in these areas. You're just never gonna, we talked about even this swamp areas or some of the, you can have that capability. Today, it's just not there real time. And we've been somewhat spoiled because I remember the day when we were tied to a 25-foot cord and my sister and I were fighting over who's gonna get the phone for long. But we have this capability today where it's in our pocket, but it's not everywhere, right? And so we do see it as being a tool. It just will not compete with what you have with the wireless site systems and the capacities that we're used to today.
Understood. And then my follow-up question would be, is there anything that the city of Palm Coast can do from our perspective that makes it more attractive or increases your capabilities to be able to push these initiatives forward?
Well, we as well as others continue to work with the carriers to determine their needs. And you saw here, we presented this case to all the carriers, say, look, you have a need here. This is how it's got to be done. And so that's what Dominic's job is to get in the carriers every day. So far, we've had some really good success with you all. We help with the wireless master plan. And our key is to go in and bring up. And over the next couple of years, we have some opportunities. And we know where sites need to be. You have a really good shopping area that's poorly covered right now. And those are the types of area that we're working on. And one of the carriers we've got coming on very soon. So it's good question.
Thank you.
Councilman?
I have nothing further. Thank you.
I still have one more, if I may. So, City of Palm Coast is in that phase, which you might want to call, build out, in terms of the number of homes that have been built and the number of vacant lots left to build.
Mm-hmm.
Along with that, we're in a real estate market which seems to have no upward boundary. It's perhaps plateauing a bit, but continues to go up. I guess my businessman question is, does our current lease agreement with you all or future lease negotiation include the increasing value of the land that you use or lease?
Dan, I'll let you do that.
Well, all of our agreements are on a revenue share basis, so we're partners effectively, and it's in our interest to try to.
So partners in the revenue, but I'm talking about it wouldn't be a capital improvement on the dirt. So the dirt to us becomes more expensive. However, it's not connected to the revenue.
Well, as does the.
So I bear the brunt of the cost of the dirt, but do share in the revenue. I understand that. It's just a question.
Right. We take all that into consideration when we put in the anchor rate for the first tenant.
Okay.
It's going up.
So City Manager, I'd ask you to take that into consideration when you're, going through these agreements in council.
Right, we have existing lease agreements, and right now, I don't believe there's any on the horizon for right now, but we can absolutely take that into consideration during the negotiation.
Good. Okay. All right. Well, gentlemen, do you have anything else to add? I mean, the only other thing that I would just ask you, because you're experts, I'm not. Could you just review very quickly, and I won't, not long, this line of sight business? In other words, a cell tower can only be placed within a relatively small location in order for it to accomplish its line of sight connectivity with whoever it is you're trying to improve service to. Can you help me with that a little bit?
Well, so the unique thing is there's certain technologies that require line of sight. Other technologies do not require line of sight.
Okay.
It's called multi-path fading and all. The wonderful thing about what we grew up on cellular coverage, but wireless coverage as it is today, because it's many things, does not really need full line of sight. In other words, it doesn't have to see because the signals have the ability to bounce and reflect. And this is what we've evolved, and that's why the FCC continues to issue more spectrum to allow that. So you don't need exact line of sight. What you need is, you need four things. You need vertical real estate, you need power, you need fiber, and then you need the capability to kind of get a site that's basically comfortable with the community, right? It's zonable, it fits in well. So the line of sight is truly for a point-to-point microwave system, but for our wireless network, it doesn't have to be exactly line of sight. It can bounce, it can go through a building, it can do things like that without causing any issue. The real concern is the height, to kind of get the distance. But then you also, what you give up with height is capacity within a geographic area. The average cell site today cover in kind of the most populous areas, again, going off our earlier question, the average cell site generates, there's about 3,000 people you're gonna need a cell site. So if you have a cell site that covers, using that 2.1 mile average nationwide, it's about 3,000 people. So for every 3,000 people, yeah, you're gonna have to have a cell site in that asset area. It's gonna have to be there from a
For the capacity part, okay.
capacity, serving, ingress, egress, that's pretty much
But
what it takes.
Pretty much anywhere within those 3,000 people geographically,
Yes,
we
sir.
can look for, well, I mean, with those other restrictions, okay.
And
All
when
right,
we
that
first
helps a little
built,
bit.
when we first built networks, that number was like 9,000, and that was back in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, because people weren't pulling in, you weren't using all the things you do for your handset, right?
And the other thing I would ask, not for now and not for discussion, but if you could update our city manager, who will then let us all know, if there's been any improvement made in disguise for the towers. In other words, there were the early terrible-looking tree disguises. Has there been any improvement in all of that? We don't need to know it now, but
Yeah.
it would be good for us to be aware of that.
Well, and that's what we're doing we're working with a couple other communities here in Florida, and what we do is we go in, there's one particular sister community you have that has 60,000 homes on the building permit force. Really, it's on the forecast for the next 10 years, right? That's 6,000 new areas. We're working on those communities today, and our job is to get together with the carriers and say, look, this is coming, this is the density. Whatever we know about the community, whether it's a live, work, and play, a high-density area, we get that in front of the carriers, and then they start putting in their plan cycle. So if it's a 26 program, between 24 to 26, they're gonna add those homes. We're there today, and we have monument systems like clock towers. We've got a lot of parks. We do some
Okay.
park types of things. So yes, there's a company out there called Teleflage that actually has rocks in the mountains, in the mountainous areas that you can't even see it because it's just a rock shroud. So there is a lot of advancements, plus the monopalms and monopines are much better today than what they were 20 years ago.
Sorry, Mayor, may I jump in? I like that term, teleflage, that's pretty clever.
I did too.
You said there were 4 things that were needed. I picked up vertical real estate, power, and a good site for the community. What was the 4th one? Fiber, okay. And have you all, in these considerations, looked at environmental impacts and impacts to health or the community in close relation to these towers? And if you have, if you could share some of that data.
Yeah, so we follow the FCC, American Cancer Society, OSHA, and as well as CDC has guidelines on what we're supposed to follow on energy levels. And fortunately, the wireless communication assets that we have is and I'm not gonna get too technical, but I'm gonna use the term non-ionizing energy. What that means is, if you're a medical doctor, that means the ability to strip an electron and basically heat tissue. You have no problem anywhere from about 40 feet, any concern from 40 feet and above as far as a vertical tower. And then when you get in these small antennas, the power is so low, it just is not an issue. The biggest concern, and hospitals are probably the best area to kind of look at this with the hospital standards. We also develop in-building systems for hospitals. And the big issue there is sensitivity to medical equipment. And if it's going to knock medical equipment out of its sequence, it's really a concern. And so people are there with their phones. They used to not allow cell phones. Now cell phones are allowed in hospitals. So there's extensive research. You can always find stuff that's on the positive side. You can always find stuff that's on the negative side. We have to, as an operator of an asset, as well as the wireless carriers, have to follow the FCC's guidelines that are basically got the information from the American Cancer Society. We do have some slides on that I can share. I'm presenting into a Texas school board committee at the end of the month. I have about 6 slides on that information. If you'd like, we can follow up with that as well.
That'd be great, because we do have quite a few members of the community who are concerned about that. And what is the distance from hospitals? As I'm sure you're aware, we have a very big presence of Advent here.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at sites, that's something that we do need to keep in mind.
They actually go on rooftops.
Okay.
They go on the roof of the hospitals. That's how well the signal, what we call attenuates, doesn't cause issues. It will take out, I mean, if there was a concern, MRI systems, monitoring
Right.
systems have big issues. And there's susceptibility studies on how that works. So, but we can follow, so I've got follow-ups. One follow-up is I'll get you that information, which it'll be in a public presentation anyway real soon. The second thing I will get you is the information on the community stuff that we're talking about. And then the third thing was I need to get the satellite data to them.
And if there could be one more takeaway, if for our council, and also just for us to have the ammunition in our pocket, just a summary of potentially the additional towers or equipment that's been put on them since we've had the wireless master plan all those years ago. I think that would be a good thing to have as well.
Oh, a timeline.
Yes,
This is
a
where it
timeline.
was, and this, okay, sure. I think we can do that. Timeline on Bill.
Great.
Yep,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Gentlemen, thank you. I think that's a very, very good presentation. I think with the follow-up information, I don't think we can ask for any more. So hopefully we can answer our residents' questions properly and intelligently. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to agenda item E2, which is I guess a presentation at this point, a presentation approving a contract with Aquatic Management Plus LLC for weed control of the freshwater stormwater drainage system. So come on up.
Good morning, Mayor and Council.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Lynn Stevens. I'm the Deputy Director of Stormwater and Engineering. See if I can get ours pulled up here real quick. Oops, wrong one. Sorry. There it is. Okay. And we're here today to talk to you about the stormwater weed control system on our freshwater canals, and just provide you some information. The item will be coming back to council on next Tuesday for approval of the contract. Not running. Having some technical difficulties.
If it's cell phone related, we can get them back in real quick. No? Oh.
May need some assist.
Come on, Carl, save the day.
Here he comes.
Come on, Carl, save my day.
We do this, we don't
Ah,
need
there
Doug
we go.
anymore.
All we needed was Carl to get out of his chair, and it worked perfectly. See that?
Proximity sensor.
So today we're going to talk to you about some current control strategies, what we currently have in our system, so that the public is educated on what exactly the stormwater system consists of. We're going to talk a bit about staff training. We are going to talk about the current spray contract as well as the new spray contract that we have coming before you next week, and then we will conclude the presentation. So the first thing we wanted to enlighten the public about is how important the stormwater system is to the ecological system. The hydrologic system, as everybody knows, is our Floridan aquifer system. Stormwater recharges that Floridan aquifer system, which provides drinking water for majority of the state of Florida. Each step of the hydrologic system is designed to reduce pollutants from entering the surface waters in Florida. And stormwater runoff can contain a lot of different contaminants, as well as sediment, fertilizer, bacteria, debris, and other chemicals from road runoff in other areas. We have to have what we call an MS4 permit, and that is a municipal separate storm sewer system. That permit is issued through EPA to operate the stormwater system that discharges waters of the state, or into the waters of the state, and in our case, it's the intracoastal waterway. The permit includes a lot of different measures to identify the major outfalls, as well as what pollutants could enter that water of the state. It also requires us to detect and eliminate non-stormwater discharges into our system and reduce those pollutants from runoff into the waters of the state. We use a lot of different controls for our stormwater discharge. That includes the control of discharges from new development or redevelopment areas. And it also requires us to implement a monitoring system so we can assess how well we reduce those contaminants to the waters of the state. And then we have to maintain and collect all the information and reports on that system, and we report it to the state on a regular basis.
If I may, did you mention a federal permitting agency for the MS4?
Environmental Protection
So
Agency.
is it my understanding that some of those responsibilities have been have been given to the state?
Yes, sir, they have. So while EPA does issue the permit, it is administered through the Florida Department of Environmental Protection.
So you have to deal with both agencies now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So in our current system, we have a series of swales, ditches, freshwater canals, and a couple of freshwater lakes out there. The stormwater, again, runs off. It does contain a lot of sediment, fertilizers, bacteria, debris, chemicals, and that's all from the road runoff, as well as properties that run off into these systems. Each step provides treatment to help reduce that pollution before it gets to the intracoastal waterways. Our swales are designed to prevent water from collecting on the roads and structures, so it collects any runoff from the roads, properties, collects into our swales. The water remains in the swales, where it's allowed to percolate back into the groundwater, thus part of the hydrologic cycle. And it helps reduce the need to irrigate as much for properties, for homeowners. And it provides that treatment for runoff by preventing those contaminants from entering the intercoastal waterways. Some of our swales consistently retain water. You'll notice that many people have water year-round in their swales. A lot of that has to do with the level of natural groundwater and the types of soils that they have. There are some soils that don't percolate as quickly as others, and therefore water will remain in some of the swales, and they'll stay wet longer than other areas of our city. A lot of people ask about the benefits. Why do we have the open swale system? There's a lot of benefits to an open swale system. One of the major benefits is the ability to remove debris as it collects in those systems. We can monitor it more easily by visual monitoring, and we can remove obstructions much quicker than we can in a pipe system. From the swales, it flows into our ditches. We have quite a few ditches around we have 177 miles of ditches throughout our city. The swales gravity flow into the ditches. The ditches also will collect water from some of the roadways and properties adjacent to the ditch, and it provides even further treatment before final discharge. From there, the ditches will flow into our canals. We do have a couple of lakes out there. We have 13 freshwater lakes, 58 miles of freshwater canals. Again, the canals and lakes collect the drainage from the ditches and some of the swales. It does provide additional treatment before ultimate discharge. We have weirs, control structures out there, 14 different control structures throughout our system that help maintain the water levels in our canal system. We also are installing some water quality monitoring, and we have some level indicators at those weirs as well, so we can see and maintain those weir levels. We also adjust those weirs for pending storms. We will drop those levels in the canals in order to prepare for a large storm event.
I have a quick question on the swales, actually two questions. For a properly working swale, how long should our residents expect to see more than what we're seeing here, which is a minimal amount of water in this top left-hand picture? How quickly should a swale be percolating that water versus holding it in order to see whether or not it's working properly?
So I know a lot of places say about 72 hours, but it depends on the time of year. If you're talking about rainy season where you're getting rain every day, you're probably going to retain water in those swales much longer. If you haven't had rain for a considerable amount of time, say 3 to 5 days, most of the water should either evaporate or it should percolate.
And that's within that 72-hour window?
Should be, but some of those areas, like we said, are designed to be, their soil concentrations are hard pan, or they'll have a soil that just doesn't percolate. It just holds that water and stays wet and has a very difficult time. So some of our areas have wet swales year-round.
And as far as the water table in the city, do you know what the average water table is, in conjunction with these swales, and how that might affect how much water is being retained as well?
So again, I think it depends on the locations. I don't have an elevation off the top of my head. I could probably find that information out and bring it back to you.
I think just for the public's benefit, because a lot of people don't understand the way the swales work, but then also there's an expectation that we understand it, but the water should be draining a lot quicker where we're in Florida, and we know that we have a very high water table in a lot of areas. So just to help our residents, I think that that would be helpful.
I do know that like over in the L section, those swales stay wet quite often, as well as I believe the B and the W sections. Those are areas where the swales tend to stay wet. That is because the groundwater level in those areas is quite high.
Okay.
You can usually tell by the elevation of water in those canals that are in those areas, but also the type of soils that they have. They do not percolate well, and they tend to hold water.
Okay.
Good for the trees, but does leave water in the swales.
Thank you.
So control strategies, what are we looking at? Well, we look at the types of vegetation that are out there. Our canals and ditches are very shallow, which means that water is warm year-round, which is a perfect environment for vegetation to grow. You see the lakes up north, or some of the lake systems that are very, very deep. That water is cold at the bottom. They don't have as much vegetative growth as we do here in Florida because, again, we have shallow canals, shallow ditches because of the natural groundwater level in Florida. If we go even deeper, it's just going to fill with groundwater, and it's not going to benefit our flood control systems. Many of the species that we have in our canal systems are considered to be invasive and not native to Florida, and therefore they have no natural enemies or predators, so nothing to keep them under control. So there's no bugs, beetles, or fish or other insects that would naturally eat these types of vegetation, and therefore they continue to grow in our systems. We attempt to control the vegetation to keep the water flowing, and on some waterways for aesthetic purposes. Other reasons that we control vegetation in our systems is because the overgrowth can reduce carrying capacity, which is our primary flood control in our city, and it reduces our dissolved oxygen, which is critical for fish life, and the loss of native species. So it can, in fact, kill out native species if they're allowed to grow. So many people say, well, why don't you remove 100% of the weeds in the canal systems? Well, they do serve a purpose. Fish and other wildlife need that protection. They use that to protect them from sunlight, keeps the water from getting too warm. It also provides them a food source, and it gives them cover and housing so they can escape any predators. And in addition, the growth rate is just way too fast for us to keep up with. It's kind of like mowing your grass in the summertime in Florida. You mow it today, and it looks like you didn't mow it in 2 days. We have the same problem this time of year when the weather is so warm. We have the same problem in our canal systems. For example, hydrilla, which is one of the common weeds that we have out there in the canal system, can grow an inch or more per day. That's a considerable growth rate. Duckweed can double its mass in less than 2 days, as well as salvinia, which grows 1 to 2 inches a week. So one of our control strategies is our chemical treatment. It is the most effective control strategy that we have in our toolbox to maintain our canals. There is not one chemical that treats all types of weeds, so it just depends on which weed we're treating in which canal. Herbicides are all EPA approved, and they do not harm any fish or other species. They're systemic or contact types of chemicals, which means that the contact type means when we spray the herbicide and it gets on the leaf, it immediately kills the leaf. Systemic means that it's absorbed into the root of the plant and kills the plant from below. Our ditches are treated 2 times a year. We have 521 acres of waterways that are maintained by us. 395 of those waterways are considered aesthetic waterways. In other words, ones that have homes alongside of them or parks, and they're considered to be an amenity of the neighborhood. We have 126 acres that are considered just to be functional type of waterways, which means they're designed to move large quantities of stormwater out of our system to help reduce and prevent flooding. Treatment for our aesthetic waterways is based on 80% clear waterway. And what does that mean? That means that the contractor has to maintain that waterway 80% clear, not 100% clear all the way to the banks, but 80% of clear water down the center. Treatment for functional waterways means that the contractor just has to maintain water flow through the waterway. He's not restricted to the 80%.
I have a couple questions regarding the chemicals. We've seen through staff presentations that chemicals have seemed to increase the price of them. Have these types of chemicals also increased, and if so, what do those percentages look like?
We have seen a significant increase in the cost of chemicals. The contractor provides the chemicals under their contract, but we have seen that they've increased, I believe it was about 150%.
And presumably that cost increase is worked into the price of the contract. It's going to make the contract price go up, I would assume, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that's increased 150%?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
And over what period of time?
I have it a little further on in the presentation. I don't believe they've had an increase in about 2 years.
Yes, it's been about, like over the past 3 to 4 years, let's say. It's been increasing since then. I mean, just like everything else.
Okay,
Yeah,
so steadily?
yes. Yeah.
Okay. And then when you say controls algae and weeds, it sounds like what you were explaining when the chemical is absorbed into the root and then kills the plant. It's not slowing the growth, it's actually killing the plant.
If it's the systemic type of chemical that they use, again, depending on the weed that they're treating for, then yes, it will kill the weed all the way down to the root. Andy is my expert, so I keep looking over at Andy.
Yeah, contact herbicides, depending on the species, it can either kill the weed or like it can act as a defoliant, but it doesn't necessarily like get all the way to the root zone.
So then what happens with those weeds that are now dead and sitting in the canals? Are the contractors, do they go back and remove those? Do they disintegrate? I mean, what happens with them?
They do not remove those. They just disintegrate at the bottom of the canals.
Do we know how long that takes, and does it affect the function of these canals?
So I don't believe it impacts the function of the canals, but I do not know how long it takes.
Yeah, that's it's hard to put a number on that.
My concern,
I guess.
I might as well ask the punchline question. Is there any danger to wildlife for having these chemically treated dead plants sitting at the bottom of our canals that the contractors are not removing?
According to all the information that we've received from EPA, Department of Agriculture, no, there is not.
Okay, thank you.
And I'd like to ask, how often are these treatments required to be done?
So the treatments are required based on the contractor for the canals. The ditches are done twice a year, but the canals are done, it is a performance-based contract, which means that the contractor is responsible to maintain that level of service. And if he needs to go back there and do it monthly, then that would be his requirement. We do monitor. We are constantly in contact with the contractor. We talk to them numerous times a week. So we are in constant communication with him. We let him know those areas that we believe need to be retreated. But it is ultimately his responsibility as a performance-based contract to spray as many times as necessary.
Thank you.
So the next control strategy that we utilize in our freshwater canals and ditches is a mechanical treatment. We have harvesting, which some of you may have seen some of the harvesters out there in the canals. It's kind of like mowing your grass, okay? So when the harvester goes through, it cuts the weed below the surface, but it does not take the root out. It doesn't prevent regrowth. It just simply reduces the top surface area for a period of time. Harvesting schedule is determined by the contractor, again with input of staff. We work very closely with that contractor to make sure that we provide the citizens the best service available. The ditches, again, are mowed 2 times a year. We have pontoon excavators, a Menzie, we use manual labor, and it just depends on the size and location when we're doing our mowing and debris removal. A lot of the mowing and debris removal is done by our in-house staff, so all of that is done by your stormwater employees. You'll see them out there quite often working in the ditches and canals and the swales in order to maintain our system. In order to control costs to our residents, we do utilize 2 inmate crews for ditch mowing and cleaning and maintenance activities. Trees and large debris are also removed by in-house staff. And we have, there's also available some barriers or some sock dams. You'll see some of the silt barriers used by contractors out there to help prevent silting of our canals and our systems out there. The barriers and sock dams for weed control are not very effective for all weeds because the barrier dam does not protrude but a short ways into the waterway, and the weeds can pop up and come underneath the sock or the barrier.
How is it determined what we're going to treat chemically and what we're going to harvest?
So we will treat based on the species. So they're continuously out there treating the different areas based on that 80% waterway. When the spray is no longer effective in maintaining that 80%, then they will use the harvesting, or we will see areas where we recommend that they bring the harvester. Bird of Paradise is a prime area where they use the harvester quite often.
So we're not paying twice, essentially, that's my concern. I want to make sure we're not paying to chemically treat something and then to harvest it. Is that discretion left to the contractor? And if so, are we, in the contract, are we having to pay more if something is chemically treated, it's just not working, and then they have to go and harvest it?
No, ma'am, because it's a performance-based contract. We do not pay additional.
Great, thank you.
So this is what the weed harvester looks like. Many of you may have seen it out there in some of our canal systems. Again, it's just the lawnmower of the canals.
Way cooler than that, though. I mean, it's more than just a lawnmower.
I have a little video of it working through there. So then we look at biological control. How can we biologically control some of the weed growth in the canals and ditches? We use carp. So the city has been very active in controlling weeds biologically. Carp are released annually. It's permitted by Fish and Wildlife, so we have to have a permit. The permit is usually good for a certain period of time. They look at how many carp we can release and where we can release them. So the permit is very specific on where we put the carp and how many we can release. These are different than the Asian carp that many people have heard of. These are called triploid carp. They're not the Asian carp that have become a nuisance species in some other areas of the U.S. The triploid carp are called that because they cannot reproduce. They're sterile. So there is no reproduction. I actually learned yesterday from UF the way they sterilize them is they sterilize the egg and not the fish. So it's sterilized before the eggs are hatched. And about 10% or more of the carp are actually consumed by predators, such as birds, alligators. Even some people have found fishing and consuming, although from what I understand, they're not very tasty. Again, carp cannot be released everywhere, and their locations have to meet stringent requirements as established by FWC, Fish and Wildlife. Typically, we will target waterways with a high degree of hydrilla, since that seems to be the preference of the carp for consumption. And they do have an average lifespan of about 7 years. The younger carp, of course, consume more hydrilla than the older ones. We first released carp in our canal systems in 2006, and we have 9 times we have released carp since 2020, since 2020. We've released about 7,700 carp into our canal systems to consume vegetation. We also looked at weevils, which are a little beetle you'll see in the lower right-hand picture in the slide. In May 2020, staff reached out to a biologist from Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. They were working on a breeding program for these weevils, and the weevil feeds primarily on salvinia, which is another type of weed that we have in our canal system. It's a very tiny, tiny beetle that is a predator of the invasive species salvinia and only salvinia, so it does not consume any other species in our canal system, or I should say it doesn't make a big impact. So the biologist took some of our salvinia samples back to the laboratory. She grew the weevils. She came back and released them in 2021. And we put them in 3 different waterways where we had a big salvinia infestation. And that was Bel Air Waterway 4, Pine Grove Waterway 2, and St. Joe's Waterway 2. So during the weevil program didn't show great success. The biologist has since left Department of Agriculture, and no one has picked up the program since. So we have not released any more weevils. We've reached out to them to see if they're going to be reinitiating the program, and they have no plans to do so at this point.
Have we done similar research to see what the success of releasing the carp is? And what has that showed?
I'm sorry, say again?
Have we done, so it looks like you've done some research to see what the success of using the weevils is. Have we done the same thing with the carp? And if so, what has that data shown?
So it's difficult to see how effective the carp have been in our system because it's not a totally closed system. If you put them in a lake or something like that, then you can definitely get some research data on how effective the carp are at consuming the vegetation. But it's difficult in the control system because you have a lot of predators out in there. So it's very difficult to see the effectiveness of the carp.
So why is it that we're using carp? I mean, it is an invasive species, and I understand what you're saying about it being triploid versus the Asian carp. I think that is a very important distinction. But if we don't know what the success rate is, we know that they are being eaten by predators. I mean, are we wasting money when we could be otherwise using chemical or harvesting treatments instead and not put an invasive species in our canals?
We're just trying to use all the tools in the toolbox to get the best control that we can out there. Because again, some of the weeds grow faster than we can either spray them or harvest them. So we're doing whatever methods we can to try and keep those canals open and free.
And I completely understand that. I guess my issue, just generally speaking, not with this, but with anything that we're doing, is it working? And if it's not working, then why are we spending money on it? If it is working, what control can we look at to show that it is in fact working?
So we will reach out further to UF. We work very closely with UF on carp release and other biological controls of weeds. So we will reach out to them and see if there's some form of research that we can do to see how effective the carp are.
Perfect, thank you.
Sure. So another thing that I wanted to bring up is training, staff training and licensing. So while our contractor is licensed, our staff play a major role in maintaining our stormwater system. The state requires that anyone that distributes or applies herbicides must be licensed. They have to have an applicator's license. And while our contractor does have a license, we also have licensed applicators on staff. Andy is one. We actually have 8 employees that have their licenses. It is a license issued by Department of Agriculture. We receive our training and exams to get that licensing, and then they have to be renewed with CEUs every 4 years. So it is a continuous education program in order to maintain that licensing. We also have other additional training that we provide to staff. We do a lot of weed control strategies. In fact, yesterday UF was in our facility in our training room and provided us some education on a variety of biological alternative treatments, the effectiveness or not effectiveness of different types of biology and different types of weeds that are growing out there. So it was very informative. We also provide staff training on proper grading and erosion control, because that's very important. A lot of people think that you can just take the weeds from the edge of the waterway all the way up and not have any weeds growing at the edge of the waterway, and that is not an effective strategy for control of erosion. If you take all those weeds and you take all the plant life away from the edge of the waterway, there is nothing to hold the water to prevent it from eroding the ground around it and causing more trouble in the stormwater system. So we do a lot of training on erosion control, grading. We also have a lot of employee training on equipment operation as well as safety precautions, just to name a few.
Sorry, I'm going to stop you again. I'm making you work today. When, specifically with our infill lots, when we have new homes being developed, to your point with regards to the type of soil that's in these swales and what helps water percolate faster, which versus that holds water, what checks and balances do we have in place when new homes are built to make sure these structures are working properly, they're not being overloaded by erosion coming from new building into other homes, things like that? What does staff do, and what onus do we put on the contractors to make sure it's working well, what they're doing is working well with the rest of our system?
So when they start construction of an infill lot, they have to provide us a grading and drainage plan, and we review that grading and drainage plan, and they have to go so many feet on the adjacent properties so that we can assure that their water is not going to go onto the adjacent properties. We also require them to have swales or some type of a depression in the yards to bring the water from the back of the lot to the front of the lot so that it drains into the swale, so that all the water from each property flows from the back of the property to the front of the property to the swale, which is where it's supposed to go. So we do that review prior to construction. We review it during construction. We have multiple inspections, as well as the building department does a lot of inspections. When we do the final inspection, we look at the final survey and we make sure that the final grade is correct and in accordance with their drainage plan as approved.
And is there any soil testing that's done, or is that not part of the process?
It is not part of Stormwater's process to monitor the soil types.
Okay.
Councilwoman Pontieri, I was going to wait till the end for this, but your point is very well taken. City Manager, I was going to ask if perhaps a shorter version of this presentation has ever been delivered or could be delivered to the Flagler County Association of Realtors. And the reason is that your point about soil testing, so there could be a recommendation on the point on the side of realtors to perhaps recommend a bore test, which would give them an idea of what the soil is like. Those maps are currently available on the property appraiser's website, which will actually show the soil type. However, unless you're an expert in soils, you may not know what the percolation rate is. But this kind of information delivered to realtors could make them, ambassadors of your message, and perhaps make the future buyers more aware of what they're looking at before they actually purchase the land and then build the home.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Mayor, because a lot of people, specifically coming from up north, they're not used to this system at all. This is completely foreign to them. And so when we try to explain, like, your swell's actually working the way it's supposed to work, the water's supposed to percolate slowly for XYZ reasons, that's just a foreign concept, which I understand. But I do think that education would be helpful for new residents and for maybe even current residents as well. Thank you.
Good point. Thank you. So our current spray contract is a 5-year contract. It expires next month, the end of October it expires. Again, it is a performance-based contract, which means that the contractor has to spray the ditches at least twice a year. However, when it comes to the canals, they're required to maintain 80% clear surface in the aesthetic waterways and maintain water flow in the functional waterways. It does include harvesting, so when harvesting is performed or additional spraying is required, that is the responsibility of the contractor, and the city is not charged additional. They do assist us in alternative methods when we do requests. So if we do request to have carp released, they do assist us in that. And I believe there is an additional charge for their assistance in that, but it would be very minimal.
Yes, we pay for the carp outside of the contract. But their services, their installation services and all that, that's all included.
You said it is included or it's not included?
It is.
It's included.
Okay, is
They do the installation.
but the cost of the carp is not included?
That's correct.
Correct.
What are those figures? And if you don't have them off the top of your head, I'd just follow up with them.
Well, I actually do.
Perfect.
So in FY '22, we spent about $15,995
On carp?
on carp. And in FY '23, we spent $24,100 for carp to purchase carp. They were running roughly about $12 a fish, so we're not sure what they're running today. We haven't priced them this year. And we did budget for $30,000 in our budget this year for alternative weed control. And that would include whether it's the carp or some other type of weed control we deem may be useful in our system.
I think what I would like to see, just for comparison to make sure we're using taxpayer dollars most efficiently, is the coverage that we're getting in the effectiveness of carp versus chemical or harvesting. That would probably be the best side by side. And so if that can be something that is followed up on so that we can evaluate that, that would be great.
We can certainly work with UF on that. We've been working very closely with the University of Florida. So we'll have those conversations with them.
Perfect, thank you.
So again, the spray contract, the contractor sets their own schedule as to when they're going to do the spray or when they're going to do the weed harvesting. They provide us that information on what their schedule is going to be, and we upload that into our website weekly so that people can see where we're going to be spraying or harvesting. If you go to our city website, you can follow the tab for stormwater. You just go to departments, click on stormwater. Once you're there, there's a little menu button. You can click the menu button and the spray map will come up, and it'll show you where we are planning to spray or where we're planning to harvest. Again, the map is updated weekly so that people can monitor the work. The spray contract, when we knew that the spray contract was coming up, there were no more renewals. So what staff did is they reviewed the contract, the current contract. They looked at the specifications. They updated the specifications. We included some real-time GPS monitoring so that we can literally see where the spray contractor is working, where they've been, as well as them providing us the schedule of where they're going. So we believe that is going to help us monitor the contract more closely. Not to say that there's been any issues. The contractor we have has been with us for about 15 years. They've done a great job for us. But this provides us more information. If a resident calls and says, when were you in my canal last? We'll be able to see that information. We also had some additional services added to this contract. We added 3 additional canals and 8 ditches to the spray contract. And we added treatment that would go 5 foot from the bank. So they will now not only maintain the 80% waterway, but they have to spray within 5 feet of the bank. We don't want them to spray all the way to the bank. Again, those plant life that live at the bank serve a definite purpose for erosion control, but we did want to get a little closer to the bank, so we put that requirement in the bid as well. The bid was released in July. We sent the bids to approximately 20 companies. We received 1 bid. It is the same contractor that we've used for 15 years, and they've been in business, and they're a local company They've been in business for 20 years. We have the contract set for council approval next week on the 19th on your agenda. So when we come back next week, what we'll do is we'll be recommending that the bid be awarded. It will continue to be a performance-based bid. Year one is $799,853.36. We will be asking for a contingency, an annual contingency amount. So if we do find some additional canal areas or ditch areas, we'll be able to service those as well. The current contract is $634,283, so it is an increase from the last one. But the increase is due to, of course, the increased level of service, the areas that we've added to the contract, as well as the new GPS monitoring and the increase in their operating costs. Like we said, the chemicals have increased about 150%. And we know that labor has increased in cost as well. The term is a 3-year contract with 2 one-year renewal options. Renewals have to be accepted by the city. The contractor may ask for an increased cost at year 4, but we are locked in to these prices for the first 3 years.
So I have multiple questions on this.
Yes, ma'am.
Why are we adding the 3 canals and the 8 ditches? Are those new, or are they old systems that we haven't traditionally monitored but have found that we need to start monitoring?
They are old that we have found that have not been maintained. So they are additional ones that we've found in our system that we need to take care of.
Okay. And do we know what percentage for the increase from 634 to 799 is based on that versus based on inflation of chemicals versus based on the increase in their other operating costs?
No, we did not get a breakdown on that with the bid documents.
Okay. It's a pretty big jump. So I would like to see what the actual increase in their hard costs are. So the chemicals, I mean, I understand those have gone up. I'm also curious as to why there's a worked-in increase of $40,000 over these years, plus a contingency. And I'm curious as to what the contingency would be for if we already have a worked-in increase.
So the contingency would be if we do find any more of those ditches or canals that we have not traditionally maintained.
So that's the only reason that would be utilized?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Or if there's any, like, sort of additional services, like, that we might need.
Such as storm recovery.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Why do we have this $40,000 automatic increase? If we don't know their breakdown of what their yearly cost increases have been, how do we know that this $40,000 increase is what is actually covering their increases? And what I'm concerned about is not you all's determination as to what it's costing, but I do think, and I've seen it because I'm in the industry with contractors, they're taking advantage of what we know is a natural inflation. Costs of things are going up. Contractors are getting a windfall. They just are, many of them. I'm not saying that this one specifically is, but is there anything that's in place to make sure that that's not happening?
So I will have to check on that.
Okay.
I can't provide you an answer off the top of my
Sure.
head. But we'll certainly go back and get with purchasing, and then we'll reach out to the contractor and get some more information.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that, just to make sure that we're not, and again, I don't want to impugn this contractor, but I see it because I'm in the industry as an attorney. And I just want to make sure that we're being very diligent with our taxpayer dollars.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So in conclusion, we do have a 3-prong approach to maintaining our ditches and canals. We use both chemical treatment, we use mechanical treatment, as well as the biological control. Biological control, in the opinion of the experts, is the least effective method in aquatic weed control in our freshwater systems, with herbicides being the most effective out there. Public education is absolute key. We need to make sure that our public, our employees, all understand the function of each system of our stormwater system and understand what the maintenance responsibilities for homeowners, for swales, keeping the culverts clean, keeping the swales clean, maintaining the mowing of the swales, as well as city staff and the use of fertilizers. Any questions?
Additional questions from city council members?
I have none.
Thank you so much, and thank you for answering all my questions. You did say that herbicide is the most successful control?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you guys so much for the information.
Questions? I just, one question. Are we able to compare ourselves to any other municipality in the state that has a size and a similar length of canal system? It's just something to think about.
Yeah, that's, you know, I mean, everywhere's different.
No, so so what I would do is, when you're having your discussion with UF, ask them,
Okay.
because they would probably know. I'd like to know if there's another municipality out there that suffers the same expense and hard work that you all go through, so that would be good to know. So really appreciate your
Just one
your
quick
presentation.
question. Yeah, please. I'm sorry. I see that you use chemicals, herbicides, and also fertilizers.
We do not use fertilizers. Residents use fertilizers.
Okay, here in the presentation, it said fertilizers.
Because when residents use fertilizers, the runoff gets into our canal system, which then feeds the aquatic growth in the canals and ditches.
I just wanted to know if that would have any effect on the wildlife.
So I don't believe the fertilizers do, not to my knowledge. We can certainly talk with UF about that. The Stormwater Department does not apply fertilizers. The fertilizers that we refer to in our stormwater system is generally runoff from residential and commercial properties. And then when they apply the fertilizer, and yes, it's great for their grass, but then when it rains or they irrigate, it runs off into the canals and ditches, and that fertilizes the weeds even further and gives us more growth in our systems. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you very much for a great presentation. We appreciate your hard work to get this to us. We'll move forward now to a presentation regarding electric vehicles and EV charging infrastructure.
Good morning, Council. Maven Rogers, Chief Sustainability and Resiliency Officer. I hope that you are ready this morning to be electrified by today's discussion. Today we will be discussing EVs, and I will be looking for guidance from Council on the establishment of a fee structure for the city's EV chargers moving forward. 1 second, sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to change the slide. Carl?
Now we got the pro coming up.
Doug, okay. Thank you, Doug. Apologies. Okay, today you'll see a graph in front of you. So this basically describes the current landscape of EVs. Florida is the second-ranked state in the United States when it comes to the numbers of EVs sold. There are over 200,000 registered EVs in the state from what the Florida DMV has collected so far. And just to add on this market really quickly, in the 2022 Army Climate Strategy, the service laid out goals to field an all-electrical, non-tactical vehicle fleet by 2035 and fully electrical tactical vehicles by 2050, showing also that multiple federal agencies and military is on board.
Maven, may I stop you?
Yeah.
what, we've seen a lot of growth in Florida. So what is the total, if you have this figure on you, great. If not, I would like follow up. What is the total vehicle registration in Florida versus what we're seeing for EVs? Because to me, this doesn't really mean much unless we have a total number of vehicles that are registered in the state to see what percentage of them are actually EV.
Well, I think, so the Florida DMV does not have that data. It wouldn't have an accurate representation of that data because the DMV just started collecting that vehicle registration based on electric vehicle here recently in the last couple of years. Also, we know that the boom of the EV industry has happened really in the last 5 years. So we know consumers, unless you bought a new vehicle, then we're looking at that data, right? But not necessarily the data of who has an electric vehicle right now in the entire state versus who doesn't, because I'm not for sure if that would provide an accurate representation of the transition to electric vehicles.
So we have no way of comparing then fuel-powered vehicle registration in the state versus EV?
Not necessarily, not yet. Not that would represent an accurate picture.
And are these full EV or do these include hybrid?
These are full EV that you see here.
And do we have any data on hybrid?
There is some data on hybrid. I would have to check with the Florida DMV and see what they collect on hybrid because I only asked about electric.
Okay.
So I can ask on that. Okay, perfect. So the market is shifting to meet this demand. So the graph you see here are the various countries, the United States being green. And as you can see from the graph above, the International Energy Agency shows that electric vehicle sales have skyrocketed globally, not only in the United States, but other large countries such as Europe. With these global sales driving markets, many car dealerships have made strong commitments to go all electric or have a large inventory of EV models coming out. According to the Wall Street Journal, published in June 2023, EV sales in the United States surged by 50% in the first half of the year. Although that pace of growth did slow amid a buildup of unsold EV inventory at dealership. This could be somewhat predictable based on residents' concerns over tax incentives on whether they were going to get them at the beginning of the year. Also, many different, depending on what generation you're from, you're actually less likely to buy a new vehicle. So that's something to take into consideration. For the first half of 2023, automakers sold roughly 560,000 electric vehicles, with the growth rate far eclipsing that of conventional cars, according to data released by research firm Motor Intelligence. Sales of internal combustion engine vehicles, which I might refer to that as ICE vehicles today, just to keep it short, but your standard vehicle grew about 10% in the period where EVs grew 50%. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, EV sales in the United States have experienced a significant growth, increasing from just 0.2% of total car sales in 2011 to 5% in 2021. These projections indicate that this upward trend will continue, with estimates ranging from 40% to over 50% of total passenger car sales being electric by 2030.
So Maven, I'm sorry, you said that in 2011 it was 0.2% and it rose by 5% in 10 years to 2021?
Yes.
It's also noted back in 2012, there was literally like no way to buy an electric car.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, I've seen your overall presentation, so I just want to make sure that as we go through this, I'm tracking it correctly, because as you and I have already discussed, Maven, I mean, we've already talked about this. I don't see the jump by 2030 that's predicted based on a 10-year period where we've seen less than a 5% jump. So I just want to make sure I had your figures right, because you're giving a lot of information, which is great, but I want to make sure I'm understanding everything as we go through.
I agree with that too.
Yeah.
But against you.
Go.
Absolutely, perfect.
Okay.
Let's listen to the information.
Great. According to the Global EV Outlook 2023 by the International Energy Agency, the number of ICE models available has been steadily decreasing since its peak in the mid-2010s. And just to note here, demographic data pulled among electric vehicles drivers reveal that over 50% of EV owners are over 55 years old.
How do we know that?
That was the Florida Department of Transportation. So there's many benefits to alternative energy and mobility. I'm going to talk about some of those today. So electrified mobility means less tailpipe pollution in our community, which is one of the leading causes of air pollution that we know about. According to the EPA, a typical passenger vehicle releases 4.6 metric tons of air pollution per year on average. The benefits of electrification is you no longer have that pollution, and as our city grows and more cars come in, EV ownership will benefit the overall air quality of our region, especially during high heat days. Increased energy diversity decreases our reliance on volatile petroleum market changes. So for instance, if we have more electric vehicles and we put more EV chargers into the network, we're less likely to rely on a gas station. EVs and EV infrastructure allow consistency in costs for residents. Energy prices overall stay consistent across the board and are not quickly subjected to change based on international relations or national politics. Over the past 10 years, average gasoline prices in most of the US have fluctuated from $1.50 to more than $5 a gallon. This is very hard for an average American family to actually budget per year if they don't know how much gas costs. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration's, the global supply of crude oil and other liquid hydrocarbons we use to fuel our cars is expected to be adequate to meet the world's demand for liquid fuels through 2050, but after 2050, we do not have a clear vision.
That's absurd.
What?
That is absurd.
Wait, whoa.
That is just absolutely absurd. That's nothing but somebody's propaganda. I'm serious.
Well, the U.S. Energy Information Administration, they are a global energy.
Of course they are. That's absurd. We have more oil in this country than you can even imagine.
We are net exporters.
We were until Biden became president.
We're still net exporters today, though.
This is absurd.
Okay, let's go through the
I
presentation.
thought we've already discussed this. We're not in the market to compete against free enterprise. We've
So,
already said we're not putting in chargers.
We haven't heard the presentation yet, so let's
I've seen
finish
the
up.
presentation.
Okay, so
This is
not
absurd.
all of us, the rest of us would like to see the presentation, and you can make your comments. Go ahead, finish.
Great. Thank you. We do know that our petroleum and oil are a form of non-renewable resources, which means that these came from fossil fuels, which were created during the prehistoric period, predominantly from plants. So if we do reach a market where we are tilting, we're not able to have enough time to catch up with that, to produce more oil, to produce more petroleum. So, but in contrast, electricity prices are much more stable, helping to keep your fuel costs predictable and easier to fit into family budgets and create jobs. When looking at the overall total cost of ownerships, EVs have significantly less maintenance and zero gasoline pumped, which helps drive down costs over time. If there's anything that you take from this slide on the benefits of EVs today, what I would like you to take is that there is cost savings involved. So for instance, I recently ran a model on City Hall, and if we were to put solar on City Hall, we would purchase a kilowatt, instead of purchasing it at 12 cents, roughly 12 cents of what we purchase it now, we would purchase a kilowatt at 0.077 kilowatt, which means less than a penny. Now, in order to charge a light-duty vehicle on that, the city would only pay $5.78 to fuel a light-duty vehicle to the top from empty. So in general, it costs about half as much to drive an electric vehicle as an equivalent gasoline vehicle. A report released by the DOE, the Department of Energy, uses national averages, showed EV drivers pay $1.22 to drive the same distance a conventional car could go on a gallon of gasoline. Beyond fuel maintenance, costs of EVs can also be lower than those of conventional vehicles. In general, all electric vehicles that use only electricity require less maintenance because there are fewer fuels, so no more oil changes or transmission fluids in an EV. In addition, with regenerative braking that captures the energy that would otherwise be lost during braking, brake systems on these types of vehicles and hybrids are typically known to last longer than that of conventional vehicles.
I have a question on
Yeah.
the life cycle cost savings. Again, I don't own a hybrid or an EV, but what I've learned from talking to people who do is that oftentimes when there's big breaks, like having to replace the battery, things like that, it is very expensive to the point where some people don't even do it. They just get a new vehicle or they trade in or something to that effect. So what I mean, can you provide some insight into that specific issue? Because that is something that I hear repeatedly.
Absolutely. So,
Councilman Clufus, I understand that you're much more educated on this stuff than I, so I welcome you to answer anything that, in conjunction with Maven, of course.
For sure, a battery pack in today's world on a normal car, a normal EV car, I should say, will last around 300,000 miles with a 10% degradation. So generally, it outlasts an internal combustion engine by far. So at 300,000 miles, you're only receiving 10% less of the total mileage of the battery. A lot of the things that you're talking about are true, and that was with like the old Chevy Bolts and things that had not great battery architectures. In today's world, and actually GM replaced every single battery pack on all the bolts and volts that they had actually manufactured. But in today's environment, where most of that has been solved by manufacturers, it's about 300,000 miles before a 10% degradation hits, which exceeds the engine life usually of an internal combustion engine.
And where do those batteries come from?
Well, so that's the other great thing.
China.
No, that's not true, actually.
That is true.
Can you asked me a question. So part of
Where do they come from?
Part of the federal rebates, so there's no more rare earth metals in iron phosphate batteries. The nickel lithium batteries do require things like, what's the one that starts with K? I can't think of it.
Cadmium?
Cadmium? No, that's a C.
No, it's a cobalt. I'm sorry, cobalt. So cobalt is the rare earth metal that specifically comes from China, but they've actually been able to remove that in the latest iron phosphate chemistries. And the legislation that's passed at the federal level mandates that these batteries have to be manufactured in the United States for them to be part of that tax rebate.
So Vice Mayor, and all of us, in the spirit of today's presentation, I am aware that Tallahassee will take up as a legislative debate in the upcoming session how to tax electric vehicles. So all I'm saying is it behooves us to learn as much as we can. We're not really here to debate the pros and cons of electric vehicles, but it's going to become a reality through Tallahassee in terms of a system of taxation in the next two sessions. So all I want to do is get through the presentation to make sure that we all understand as much as we can. So Maven, please continue.
The false information being presented today is absurd.
There's nothing.
And I'm sorry, you know, you look at a lot of things here, California and Texas, look at their electric grid. They can't handle what they have. A lot of people forget about that.
Well, Texas has
And
their
the
own
stuff
electric.
coming out of the Department
Again,
of Transportation,
let me just,
Department of
so let me just,
Energy is nothing but woke propaganda.
okay, so let me just restate my point. Now, if you disagree with the legislature of the state of Florida, who have deemed this an important and primary discussion for the upcoming session, please take it up with them.
I will.
But for us, that's fine. So for us, I want to make sure that we're as educated as we can be so that we understand what's coming.
That's my problem.
Okay.
Mayor, I'm sorry, I have to step in. I'm asking questions because I genuinely want to know the answers. So I want to continue to ask my questions. I don't want to just run through a presentation. I'm always inquisitive. So I'm not pushing any one agenda or another, trying to quash one agenda or another, but I need to be educated on these things because I don't know a lot about this subject. So I understand you wanting to get through the presentation, I do as well, but I am going to still stop Maven and ask questions that I find to be appropriate.
Okay.
great, thank you. And just to reiterate and go back to your question, council member. So the batteries are more expensive than a car engine, let's say. So I did do some more research and I found out from, JD Power that these EV batteries last about 10 to 20 years. They're estimating, and what I will say, I also found out more information, and it's a little bit all over the place, but an average American resident will purchase 6 to 8 vehicles in their lifetime. So it's considering that and considering 10 to 20 years, you're probably looking at a situation where the battery will go out much past its previous owner. And we also, the federal government is investing into battery recycling because they do realize how expensive cobalt and lithium can be. So that's actually being taken into consideration a lot in Georgia. So there's many manufacturers opening up in Georgia right now to address that issue. So material management, I've never seen material management addressed so aggressively as EV batteries. So I think we're in pretty good hands when it comes to the recycling.
Yeah, that is a concern because we are on this slide about kind of the environmental impacts. And I know previously when these first came out, the batteries were, creating them was harsh on the environment. It just was, you see these battery fields and it's kind of a nightmare to look at. But I don't know if that's the case now. So when we're considering whether or not this actually is good for the environment, where we're getting mining and things like that. I do think that it's important to maybe follow up with some more of that information because it's changed vastly, I understand, over the last decade.
Absolutely, and right now, a lot of our,
And real
oh
quick,
yeah.
I just mean this in the absolute most educational way, and I'm thankful that you're looking for answers like this. The recycling landscape for batteries now is the new Tesla batteries are 100% recyclable, and the reason you actually want to recycle these batteries is because the way that batteries degrade is there's basically shorts that occur between the jelly on a battery, and that's how a battery goes bad. It basically goes through all the layers of the jelly. But when you have a full battery, you can just melt it down, and at different temperatures, scoop off the lithium, scoop off the iron, scoop off the phosphate. So it's far more price effective to basically take a used battery, melt it down, and then just take your raw materials right off of it. In the future, once all the lithium is mined out of for all the batteries that are needed in the world, we won't actually have to continually mine lithium because it becomes so much cheaper to just take a full dead battery pack and just melt it down, then just scoop the lithium right off. You can just reassemble the batteries once you've actually melted them back down. There's no loss of raw materials there, which is interesting. I found that interesting.
So what is the average cost of these batteries? You keep saying that they are more expensive.
Yes, well, it just depends on what type of car you have, but it's $5,000 to $10,000. But most of the time, you don't.
Say that again, I didn't hear you.
$5,000 to $10,000. It can range depending on what type of vehicle you have.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry, I'm having issues getting. There we go. So today I did want to show what Florida is working on. So if you see here, this is the state's EV plans and policy updates. We'll go into the next slide. But the Florida Department of Transportation has published an electric vehicle infrastructure master plan, which aims to support short and long range EV travel as well as emergency evacuations. The visual you see here is a short version of FDOT's EV infrastructure master plan. You see that there are 3 main phases. The early phase is an analysis and deployment of charging sites along the highway within 40 miles of spacing. That's the current phase we're in now. The middle phase will focus on increasing the number of those chargers at the initial sites, and the later phase will take the 40 miles between spacing down to 25. So overall, the state is looking to see along our highway charging stations at every 25 miles. This plan is expected to be accomplished by 2035, with the state already taking proactive steps to ensure its success. We will talk a little more on funding for this program on a future slide. From my understanding at this current moment, the City of Palm Coast or our neighboring areas will not be included in Phase 1 implementation. I am waiting further guidance.
So this is the slide that I was referring to earlier. And I don't mean to impugn your data, or what you're presenting, but this makes zero sense to me. How it is we can go from 2 to 8% in a 5-year period between 20 to 25, and then jump up to 30% by 2030. Where is this data coming from, and why the jump if, as you just said a few minutes ago, sales have started to slow and there's actually starting to be kind of a stockpile, so to speak, of EVs in the second half of 2023. I mean, how are they projecting such a jump by 2030?
Well, I think I can email FDOT and ask them. I know they had quite a large number of engineers and things working on this, so I can see exactly where they received their data from.
Yeah, I think that's necessary. Before we start to spend money on infrastructure, we need to know what these figures are based on. Because just arbitrarily saying, oh, by 2030, we think it's going to jump to 30%, when in the last 10 years it's gone, like I said, less than 5%, I would need to see that data. Mm-hmm. Or I guess the information behind it. My other question is, if the state is planning on putting these charging stations on the highway, what would entice somebody to get off the highway and into Palm Coast to use our charging stations if we decided to also install charging stations within the city? If they're going to be right on 95, why would they come off of 95 in order to use ours?
Well, right now, and they haven't released the final issue, but what I've seen is that we're not a part of Phase 1 at all. And there's about, actually, I would argue maybe more than a 40-mile stretch where those chargers are not going to be deployed in our region for Phase 1. So we're probably going to see our electric vehicle charging come more around Phase 3. which will be more around that 2030 timeline, 2035 timeline. And so what I would say to that, and also this is, I'm not exactly for sure how many EVs chargers they're planning on at these lots. So I know it has to be at a minimum 2, but that's minimum. And so 2 is 4 plug-ins. So 4 cars, that can fill up a charging station pretty quickly, especially if you're highway driving. So having those different options to pull over and be on your app, I think would still encourage people to pull over to Palm Coast.
So how is it that you can say we're not going to be in phase 2 or phase 3? Is there something that FDOT has actually released that plans out, you know, where they're planning on putting these? And if so, we need that. We need to see what that looks like, because again, not impugning you, Maven, but you're saying this, but I don't see it. And I'm a database person, so I need to see it. And then, you know, on that, if we're not included in these phases, is it because whatever they're looking at, whatever FDOT is looking at, they're not showing a need? And in that case, why are we spending money if there's no need? So I want to look at this from all different angles to make sure that we're not spending money on something that is otherwise being provided for, or that there isn't a need for.
Well, I know that phase 1 they haven't released yet. I only had seen a draft, so I wouldn't feel comfortable bringing that to the council because that hasn't been released publicly from my knowledge. And I did email the TPO last week for further guidance, and I haven't heard back, so I do not think it's been released. The middle phase, they're only deploying more chargers in their initial sites in the first phase. So no new chargers are going to be part of that second phase. Now I know FDOT, this was very much a private stakeholder meeting and things when they were trying to figure out where to put these. So if we didn't have a private stakeholder representing City of Palm Coast at those meetings, or someone interested, because it has to be property that's a mile off the highway. That is a requirement. So if we didn't have any interest at those tables or those roundtable discussions by our private sector, then then this is probably why we're seeing that we weren't included in those early phases.
And I appreciate that. My last question specifically on this is, are there national or federal incentives to states who present a plan like this? And I ask because we all know that sometimes, like when we announce a state of emergency, let's not sugarcoat it. Sometimes we announce that we're in a state of emergency when we're kind of not, but we want to make sure we get FEMA monies eventually. So what is the realistic implementation of this versus what maybe the state might be putting together and presenting in order to get federal dollars based on, and I'm not trying to get political, but based on who's in office? I'm being very realistic right now. Do we know that?
Well, so it depends on what we're looking for federal dollars for. Mm-hmm. If we're looking for federal dollars to expand our EV infrastructure, then yes. If we're looking for federal dollars to look at a fleet transition study possibly, or EV charging studies, yes, that can be funded. FEMA does have some grants, the HMGP funding that will fund solar because of energy security. EV chargers can also be sold as energy security in some sense, depending on what the EV is. So we're seeing more EVs being incorporated. For instance, the city of Cape Canaveral is applying for FEMA for 2 Ford electric vehicles. So that way, if they lose power at one of their buildings, they can actually they can take the power from the F-150 and plug it into that building.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know what dollars we're getting federally as a state, because we have this plan.
Oh, well, the federal dollars from the state, that is the NEVI funding, the National Electrical Vehicle Infrastructure funding. That is already there and invested into the state.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question. I would just be curious if you've done much research on who would be installing these EV chargers outside in the private sector, like the gas stations, the car dealerships. Have you done any research on that?
Yes, there is. So you have let's say, for instance, you have ChargePoint, right? That's a very popular EV charger. So you have ChargePoint, and then they have other organizations that actually install their chargers for them, because ChargePoint is just running their cloud software and providing the chargers. So there's a whole other industry, and especially with electrical engineers, that is coming due to this EV deployment, and it's growing, which I do have in another slide when we talk about workforce development. Great. So I know one thing that was brought up is, what is the state doing? So this map up here will show you different taxes that are done across nationally, so you can get a little bit of an idea of the landscape. So I'm going to quickly touch base on 2 state legislation updates that would particularly address the EVs and EV adoption. So there was a report from the Electrification Coalition and Advanced Energy United that found the state of Florida could save $277 million by considering the total cost of ownership on their vehicle procurement decisions, instead of comparing just a current practice of considering just the purchase price. So basically what they do is at the state, they say, okay, what car is cheaper? And use their money to buy that. But what they're not looking at is a total overall life cycle. How many oil changes do we do? How much is it for a gallon of gas per kilowatt? Those types of decisions, when you incorporate that, electric vehicles typically do end up being on top. Identified by the report was switching that 88% of the state fleet that was made up of light-duty vehicles like pickups, sedans, SUVs, and vans to electric vehicles, found that we could save over $18,000 per vehicle on average over the next 15 years. Given this new evidence, this led to a bill being introduced to the state of Florida. The state House and Senate said that they would mandate cities and states to do a total cost of ownership, as oftentimes with these light-duty vehicle fleets, you will see cost savings. It passed Florida's House and Senate, but was not signed by the governor at this time. Now to touch on the gas tax. The Florida Department of Transportation states and recognizes that all motor fuel consumption-based revenue streams will be reduced with the EV market. Rising market shares of EVs are expected to adversely impact revenues collected from highway fuel taxes into resources like the State Transportation Trust Fund over the next 20 years. Local option fuel taxes will also be adversely affected, which could have implications for operations and maintenance of local roadways, as well as public transportation. This decrease in gas taxes are also a result of more fuel-efficient vehicles, as the amount of fuel purchases decreases across the board, resulting in lower fuel tax revenue. So I just want to quickly say there are multiple conversations happening nationally on the state level for how to define an accurate price equivalent to a gas tax. So some organizations are estimating that roughly $125 annually would basically take the place of someone that drove a regular ICE vehicle on gas taxes, while others say it is $250. Current projections suggest that the average Florida driver drives 13,500 miles a year. In this situation, it would be estimated that Florida drivers would pay around $200 to $250 in gas taxes annually. However, this data does not reflect the increasing number of individuals who are opting out of driving in larger cities or cities that prioritize walkability. Most states have passed some type of fee structure, as you can see from the graph above. Some states charge a yearly fee, like West Virginia and Alabama, which both have roughly a $200 annual fee, or there are other states like Colorado actually providing additional financial incentives to switch to electric vehicles. Earlier this legislative season, the Florida Senate suggested an extra $200 a year fee for EVs. It did not make it to the House. While there is no argument at the state electric vehicle drivers should pay, there are 2 specific issues with the proposal that came up. First, some lawmakers believed EV owners would be taxed at a significantly higher rate than drivers of traditional gas fuel cars at that $200 range. Secondly, roughly 50% of gas taxes paid in Florida are paid by tourists. Under SB 1070, while Florida EV owners will pay a significant tax, visitors to Florida who drive electric vehicles will pay nothing. It has been suggested to look at different models for ensuring electric vehicle owners pay their fair share of road maintenance. Eventually, I think probably what we're going to see out of this is it very much being taxed at the pump. So just like you're taxed at a gas pump, EV chargers will most likely be taxed at the pump as well.
Do you know if there's any pending legislation or anything coming down the pipeline in the industry that can give us a better guesstimation as to when that might take place?
I think we'll see new legislation be brought up again next year. And then depending, I think especially coupled with FDOT's state EV infrastructure plan, I think it's really just down to figuring out the technology.
I try to track House and Senate bills, but it's hard because there's so many. If you could keep me updated, I don't know if the rest of my colleagues would like it as well, but just shoot me an email when something regarding EVs is coming down the pipeline, anything is presented to the floor, anything that you think might have legs, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Also, if you could send it to at least me as well, I appreciate that.
Yes, absolutely. So to quickly talk about some possible funding opportunities for EV infrastructure. There are numerous grant opportunities available to procure EV chargers at an extremely low rate. The Charging and Fueling Discretionary Grant Program will be rolling back around in the spring of 2024. This is a 75-25 grant opportunity with the ability to take some tax credits to possibly offset that 25% depending on location. If the council is interested in an ROI on EV chargers, the Charging and Fueling Discretionary Grant Program is a great option for that. There is also an alternative fuel infrastructure tax credit, which could be a potential to save 30% from our installation of EV chargers if they meet certain requirements. We are waiting for more direction from the U.S. Department of Treasury, which is estimated to have more information around October. Many additional grant opportunities are coming down the pipeline. The ROI is much higher if we take advantage of these grant opportunities. Now going on to the private sector. Based on our last discussion, I did reach out to quite a few individuals from the private sector. Basically, if the city of Palm Coast was interested in providing spaces for the private sector to come in, no upfront cost or maintenance would be required on the city, but sharing the collection of revenue is unlikely. There could be a moment where there is a 50-50 split between the city of Palm Coast and the private entity, but it would take quite some time and the private industry would want to see a certain ROI before they would initiate the 50-50 split. In addition, after 10 or 15 years, if the city decided it did not want the infrastructure, the company would come remove it by contract. There would be no cost associated for the city. The city would only need to provide the parking spaces. And I will say that the private industry is very interested in this region because they see the lack of chargers and they see a financial opportunity.
Well, and I think this is Vice Mayor's point that he's voiced from the dais before. That's kind of where the hesitation comes from, right? If private industry sees an opportunity here, why not let them come here and make money as businesses? I think we just saw 2 developments last week that said that they will be installing EVs within their developments. And this is something, Maven, you and I spoke about. What we need to really look at what the realistic need will be, knowing that we have developments that are coming in and installing chargers as a part of their, their overall developments. We know we have a Wawa coming that's going to have a couple of these. What is the actual need that is going to be present after we have all of these other private industries doing what you are saying they want to do because they see an opportunity? And if we do take this step, what are we looking at? And I can tell you when the grant opportunity comes up again, these are the questions that I'm going to ask. I'm going to give you a heads up now. Let's say over a 5-year period, is that kind of the sunset of what it will take for us to make our taxpayer dollars back? In other words, if we put in 25%, is it going to take 5 years, 7 years, 10 years? What will it take for us to make that money back? And then after that, what is the future profit potential? Because, if private industry is going to come in and do it, I say let them do it. If we are going to put these at places like the Southern Rec Center, obviously that might be smart because people, they're going to spend 3 hours playing tennis or pickleball or swimming or whatever. But what are we looking at as far as our return on our investment? What's the timeline and what's the amount of money?
Mm-hmm. And yes, and I can bring that back up especially if we go to the grant opportunity. But to lightly touch on your point now, I've given it a lot of thought, is how does the private industry, how we do not want to impact it. And what I would say to that is that the city of Palm Coast is not looking to expand their EV infrastructure by 50-fold. Which that would be.
We don't need it, so I'm glad to hear that.
No, we absolutely do not need it. And when I think about what it looks like, depending on the type of private industry, if Walmart inevitably puts in 10 chargers, right, where does that money go?
Well, I agree with you, but I'm looking further in your slides too, and there's really not much money to be made off of these things, even for us. So that's my concern. You got to look at upkeep, so I'm looking at some of these programs, and yeah, it's great at the beginning, we get all this money, but then the onus falls on us after a certain amount of time to fully pay for upkeep. And so that's a concern of mine. So I understand what you're saying as far as, where does that money go? But at the same time, should we be taking money out of their pocket if they're going to pay for it to be installed and for the upkeep when there's such little money to be, truly, there's little money to be made on these things from your data. So I guess I think, from a state standpoint, paying for the registration of these or getting a certain amount of money from these from a legislative standpoint may be the better way to go. But that's just some of the data. Once the grant comes back and you're asking us for, to approve that's some of the information that I'll want.
Perfect, thank you. And I do have a warranty included in my ROI that does keep up with upkeep, so that's great. And then we do have the state funding, which I briefly described. That's the NEVI funding. Now, any collections collected from these EV chargers will go back into Title 23 projects, which are considered transportation projects. They're expecting $1 billion each year will be deployed in this program under the bipartisan infrastructure law up until 2026. These locations have not been released on the first round yet. So to briefly talk about workforce development, jobs in the renewable energy sector grew in 2021 as fossil fuel employment declined, according to Forbes. Morgan Stanley predicts the coal industry will disappear by 2033, propelled by economics more than policy. This seems to be an ongoing trend of an industry that is changing. With these different EV chargers and infrastructure and the new renewable movement, we can create more jobs than we lose. According to Forbes, the economics are driving both sides of this equation. Building new renewable energy is cheaper than running existing coal plants, and prices get cheaper every year. By 2025, almost every existing coal plant in the US will cost more to operate than a renewable. So multiple states and utilities are setting 100% clean energy goals. This creates a new demand for workers to build solar panels, EV infrastructure, wind turbines, and others. Planning for this transition can create new economic opportunities in our region and every other corner of this country. This is a unique time in history where we need jobs, and they are here and they benefit our environment. With the creation of the NEVI program, the state program, we will soon have a comprehensive network of 500,000 chargers across the country. There will need to be workers that install these chargers. In addition to these chargers, any stations going in under Title 23 funding and NEVI will require electricians to go through an electric vehicle infrastructure training program, which is actually offered by our Daytona State College. According to U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the state of Florida has roughly 6,000 electrical and electronic engineering technologists and technicians with an annual mean wage of $61,330. Alignment with the large state infrastructure, $1 billion a year till 2026, coupled with increased chargers across businesses, governments, and other tourist destinations, jobs will be open and good paying jobs. In comparison, the average gas station attendant salary ranges from $13 to $17 an hour. On the higher range, this would equal $35,360 a year, assuming they have full time. This does not include benefits. The increases in the work demand will have positive impacts on local communities and families. And now we're going to get into basically what the ROI is on these different chargers. So we're going to talk a little more about the difference. So currently there are 3 chargers on the market. You have level 1, level 2, and level 3. Level 1 is considered an at-home charger, so not used for recreation parking services, so thus the decision to not include that in today's presentation. Level 2s can charge at 12 to 80 miles an hour, depending on vehicle and charger, filling most EVs from empty within 4.5 hours, which is the one that we have outside of City Hall. Level 3 chargers fill a battery at a rate of 75 to 1,200 miles per hour. It would top off an empty battery in 30 minutes, so much faster. It is recommended in city planning to have a healthy amount of both chargers. EV vehicles should not always charge on a DC fast charger. It's kind of like plugging your phone into a fast charger. The more you plug your phone in and it gets that fast charge, the more the battery will degrade over time if you're only using a fast charger. So it's healthy to have different amounts like level 2 and level 3 options. The ROI of these chargers are significantly different based on what model you choose. So DC fast chargers have a higher ROI, but an increased upfront cost. So DC fast chargers, depending on the model, can be anywhere from $45,000 to $60,000, but you do see an average ROI of $60,000 a year. So it kind of evens it out. But level 2 chargers are roughly $10,000, but they have a lower charge rate, causing the ROI not to be as high as a DC fast charger. It seems to be how the current market works. The more level 2 chargers you have in your inventory, the higher ROI if we go level 2. And if you have a healthy mix of DC fast chargers, that's where you see that really big ROI and that benefit.
Maven, is it possible to have, this might sound like a stupid question to you and Councilman Clufus, but is it possible to have a fast charger at home? And I ask that because if most people are charging their EVs at home, to your point, when they go out, you don't want to always plug your car into a fast charger, but presumably because they're doing most of their charging at home, they're not charging it most of the time using a fast charger. So why use something else other than a fast charger when they go out? So is it possible to have these? I mean, are these made for home usage, or are they only made for more commercial or public use?
They are not made for home usage. It's a large amount of pull from the grid. And I would say from a homeowner's perspective, it's beneficial to use level 1. So for instance, FPL has a program where I can go home at 7 p.m. and eat dinner and plug in my car because I get home at 7, but it's actually not gonna start charging till 10 p.m. because I'm going to pay because of off time. So there's on peak, you pay more per kilowatt hour if you're using that energy during a high energy time, which is typically during work time. So if I charge my car at night, I'm paying less a kilowatt hour. Now, if I've got a DC fast charger and it's pulling from the grid all at one time, you get penalized for that. So it wouldn't benefit the homeowner to charge on a DC fast charger. It's much more cost savings over a level 1 because you're sleeping 8 hours, your car's charging, and so you see much more. And it's a level 1 is like a washer and dryer unit, where a DC fast, I mean, you're talking about infrastructure improvements.
I wish I got to sleep 8 hours.
One more thing to adjust. The level 1 charger, the Tesla, it's a 50 amp charger. It's just a wall-mounted unit. It can still charge 40 miles per hour. So it doesn't look like this, but it's somewhere between a level 1, which is like a literal wall plug, like a hairdryer plug, and then the ones that are home-mounted chargers. They're not these big units like this, little brick like this, but charge about 40 miles per hour.
Okay. What is the cost of purchasing and installing these? Because I don't really see the point, to be candid with you, of spending any more money on level 2 chargers. I mean, the ROI is not even comparable. The ROI is so vastly different. But I would still want to know what the cost is for both purchasing and installation, and then continued maintenance on these units as well once we have them.
Absolutely, and I would say just the initial charger, level 2 is around $10,000. DC fast higher end is $60,000, and the infrastructure depends on what you have underground. So some cities are actually creating EVSE ready policies, which require developments to lay the groundwork down, because it's so much cheaper to lay the groundwork now when you're under construction than it is to go back in and tear pavement and earth up. It also depends on how close your meter that reads the energy is, and if you have to create a new one and things like that. So installation infrastructure costs can be anywhere. Level 2's not so much, but DC fast, roughly kind of maybe, I couldn't give you a good estimate. It would depend on the location.
Yeah, I would like to know on average that installation and kind of laying the groundwork quite literally for these, as well as what the annual upkeep is. Because you have a potential ROI here. Presumably you got that by basing what we could make for, I'm assuming that's a net revenue, not a gross, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I would like to know the data that went behind coming up with that net figure, because you had to have done this research on installation infrastructure and yearly upkeep in order to come up with a yearly ROI. So I'd like to know what data went into that.
Okay, great. Yes, and I can go over that once I get to that slide. Perfect. Okay, and I just wanted to quickly talk about planning and location, considering based on the council's need. But this is an example from the Florida Department of Transportation. When we're picking site locations, you want to keep in mind the users, and with the new creation of mobility hubs, how we can best plug in. So cities are being encouraged across the nation to create these type of mobility hubs, almost as an amenity for a park service to bring people to your parks and residents. Install it and they will come is not necessarily the way you ensure your electric vehicle charging station is going to be a success. Different variables come into play, like the ones above. However, what it really comes down to is two things. Is it usable to the public in a convenient way, and are there other things to do around? This is why you see City Hall as a successful pilot with this location to Central Park, City Hall, and other events. In addition, the Southern Recreational Facility is a perfect location for EV chargers, as there are multiple activities that residents and visitors can participate in while charging their vehicles, whether that is eating at the restaurant located at Southern Rec, playing pickleball, walking our Lehigh Trail, or enjoying the community garden. All of these activities are true amenities as well as the EV chargers. So I want to briefly talk about what we have currently. So this is Light Team's analysis of EV chargers in Palm Coast. They found there are 7 site locations with a total of 14 chargers equaling 28 plugs. When we look at the number of cars registered by the Florida Department of Highway Safety, we see that Flagler County shows a total of 504 electric vehicles registered out of the 22,625 vehicles accounted for in the study. It is important to note that there is 125,736 vehicles in Flagler County not accounted for in this data set, as the Department of Highway Safety just recently started collecting this data. What we do know for sure is that there is at least 504 registered electric vehicles in the county that are residents. And I say residents because it is important to note, as a possible destination for tourism and family visits, these are not included and have EV drivers. However, for the 504 registered vehicles, there are 28 plugs serving the region. This can be viewed in multiple ways. First, that having an EV charger in the city of Palm Coast can be a great way to attract individuals to your business due to the lack of charging infrastructure and number of vehicles for the demand. Also, it shows us that we can encourage residents to come enjoy the amenities that the city of Palm Coast has to offer by offering charging at our premium site locations, such as Southern Rec. There is a gap of number of EV drivers and chargers with national data showing that the growth of EV adoption outpaces the growth of infrastructure by a factor of 4.
Maven, these ones that you've listed, are these level 2 or fast chargers?
The Wawas are fast chargers. All the rest of them are level 2. So quickly to go over the EV fee structure. So what you'll see on the left is more located here in Palm Coast, and what you see on the right is how other cities are setting up their EV charging. The list, let's see, through the observation of this data, we can conclude that the city of Palm Coast, Wawa, and Advent Health are some of the only public charging locations for residents and tourists, meaning these organizations are setting the market trends for the area. If you look to the right of the list, you can see that these Florida cities are mostly collecting on a rate that covers their energy cost. Taking the current market rates in Palm Coast and various other cities' charging rates, I'm able to present you with a couple of different options today. So this is directly related to the EV charger that's outside of City Hall. The main drivers of why I chose the rates you will see today are based on an average market rates and energy costs. This is also based on the monthly usage that we have already collected from ChargePoint. We do have a cloud software that allows us to see how much it's being used, how many times, and things like that.
But those are free usage.
Yes,
Yes.
right now, currently.
Yes. So those numbers are not going to hold up possibly if we're charging.
Yes. And there's no way to actually predict what will happen when we do. And it depends.
Give away something for free, it's one thing.
Yes.
Stand out there all day long and give away free hot dogs and potato chips. But once I put a price on them, that's going to change the usage. That's going to change the consumption.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so to try to account and mitigate for some of that, I did put our kilowatt hour as 12 cents, which is technically at this point 0.11. So I tried to account for that, and I tried to go on the lowest usage month to account for lower usage. So this is
free usage.
The lowest free usage, yes.
Maybe we might want to cut those numbers just in half, just to start with.
Yes, but there is a possibility. The good news is that the EV charger outside of City Hall is completely paid off for. So the ROI that we see now will be the ROI that we see in the future after we charge it.
Can I ask you a question on
Yep.
the kilowatts? Because again, this is very foreign to me. And you might not know this, it's kind of a weird question. 24 kilowatts, what does that translate to as far as either a gallon of gas or a full charge on a vehicle? And I only ask that because I'm trying to figure out, based on that, how many vehicles have fully charged at our stations per month?
I can do the math very quickly.
My car has an 80 kilowatt hour battery.
Okay, so we could, excuse me, we could divide 2,400 by 80 and see how many quote-unquote fill-ups.
If they had the same battery size, yeah, that
Right.
would be totally feasible, absolutely. But some do have, like the Hummer has a 200 kilowatt hour battery, but it gets less
I haven't seen
mileage.
any Hummers out there.
Oh, I saw one in Hammock.
Really?
Yeah, it was really neat.
Yeah, I'm
Completely
just trying to
impractical.
figure out the usage, you know, what are we actually seeing as far as people right now, to Vice Mayor's point, right now, even with free stations, what are we seeing as far as usage?
And it looks like when I just kind of ran the numbers, 32 cars could charge from from E to full. But we don't know, you know, they might just be charging for a day, for, you know, an hour or two and things like that. So
That's on average about 32 fill-ups, we'll call it.
fill-ups from E to full. And so I did choose a couple of different rates here. So currently the Wawa Level 3 chargers, those are the DC fast, located at City Hall, charge 30 cents per kilowatt. As a general practice, Level 2s are always cheaper from their Level 3 counterparts, which is why I would recommend that the city establishes a price point lower than 30 cents per kilowatt. Considering this an energy cost, the best charge seems to fall between 15 cents and 20 cents per kilowatt hour. In addition, there are cities that incorporate a one-time user fee to help recoup the cost, because ChargePoint does require us to give 10% to them for using their cloud services. So you will see that reflected here at 50 cents right at below there. This means that you will be charged 50 cents every time you charge alongside your additional kilowatt hour usage, which that would actually be a decision from council if they do want to charge that initial charge. Some cities do, some cities do not. I find that if you do charge the initial charge, it actually makes our ROI quite higher. It covers that 10%. We're really just trying to cover that 10%, right? So for instance, based on the first scenario of 15 cents, you can see that without adding the additional charge of 50 cents per session, we are at a net loss of $466 instead of a net gain of $45. Not all of the rates are this extreme in disparities, but initial hookup fee can be charged and is provided option. To address idling, the City of Palm Coast can start charging a fee that would reduce any idling or overnight time. This isn't included in the ROI just because it's unpredictable. One city has a rate set at $5 for every additional hour that the vehicle remains on the charger after it has a full charge. This rate is flexible. However, I would not recommend going over that $5, and I would probably recommend keeping it at $5. And what the app will do is it'll actually ping you. We can set the time. So if we want to say, you have 15 minutes to get back to your car to get it, it can be 15 minutes, or it can be 30 minutes or an hour. But after that, they would start to be charged $5. You can find a recap of the three prices rates above, the ROIs on the 15-cent fee, 18-cent fee, and 25-cent fee. Miscellaneous costs are referring to the 10% for ChargePoint warranties and cloud software, so that does include the maintenance. So anytime, I know our charger just had a cracked screen, I called ChargePoint, they came out and fixed it, that was no charge to the city. You also see very little maintenance with these EV chargers. Honestly, unless they are hit with a vehicle, or actually, you know, damaged by another human, I don't see a lot of our EV charging infrastructure being upkeep or cleaned or anything like that.
An electrical engineer? I mean, what are you basing this on?
Well, basically my experience, so I've been working in the field for 8 years now, and the city of Orlando deployed 100 EV chargers under my division, and we have not seen any type of maintenance in that time.
A piece of electronics eventually burns out and has to be repaired or probably replaced. Things don't last forever. There will be a cost down the road.
Absolutely, and that's why we have the warranty to make sure that we're covered under that. So you can see so at a rate of 15 cents, we see a negative return of $4.66. If we had the 50-cent initial charge, we can see an ROI of $45. At a rate of 18 cents, we see an ROI of $328. If we had the 50-cent initial charge, we can see an ROI of $839. At a rate of 20 cents, we see an ROI of $804. If the 50 cents initial charge gets put on, we can see an ROI of roughly $1,300. And I would say, this would vary, much on, it would be much higher if these were DC fast chargers, and also we're not sure because of it's free right now, so we can predict we have higher usage. I try to go on the lower rate to try to offset that a little bit. So these ROIs are a little bit unpredictable until we actually start charging. But yes, I just wanted to note that. Do we have any questions or concerns?
I got a lot of questions.
All right, let me try to help you with that.
I don't need your help.
Well,
They're my questions.
okay, then hold on for a second.
No, you get to go next, right?
No. Maven, you're looking for direction from City Council, so let me offer my direction. First, thank you for the presentation. What I would be interested in the future, despite what the industry is offering, is I would be interested in setting a precedent for the city of Palm Coast that what we would like to do, so as we do not interfere with the private sector, is if there are locations that the private sector are interested in, we would offer them some form of a land lease where they could pay for the dirt that they installed their own equipment and manage their own equipment on. That's number one. Number two, I would like to know if any cities in the state have considered requiring a permit fee for the installation of chargers within their municipality. Now, Vice Mayor, you have questions?
Well, yes, I want to, number one, make sure that we do not interfere at all with the free marketplace, one bit. If there's a need for this, if there's a demand for this, then the free marketplace will answer that demand. It's not our job or our business to compete against the free marketplace. And I gotta be honest with you, I'm not impressed with you. When you came in here the first time and you said, wouldn't it be wonderful if our citizens spent their money
Vice
at
Mayor,
our local businesses
Vice Mayor-
rather than the gas stations. Well, I got news for you.
Hold on.
Those gas stations are part of our local business. You just can't blow them off like that. And that's very, very concerning to me. And the facts that you're presenting, quite frankly, they're just based on AOC, Green New Deal, Joe Biden, Pete
All right.
Buttigieg.
Vice Mayor, I think you made
And
your
I'm sorry,
point.
when you
Vice
shut
Mayor,
down- I'm
Vice
not
Mayor.
finished yet.
Yeah, you are.
No, I am
Yeah,
not.
Yes, you are, because
No, you do not interrupt me.
hold
You
on.
don't-
You're
I get to speak.
you're addressing staff.
I
If
am,
you have
and
a
I'm not
question,
happy
excuse
with
me,
this.
if you have a question about staff's
I am
assignment,
not happy with
you
this,
should
and I will
direct it.
express myself any way I want, Mr.
No,
Mayor.
I'm sorry, you will
You
not.
do not control me. You're elected, I'm elected. All right?
Hold on.
We're individuals.
But you also need to understand the organization of
I
the city.
understand the
If you have
organization.
a
I
question
understand
about
the
the
garbage I'm
assignment, you
hearing
should
today.
address it to the city manager.
I
I will
understand the
not
garbage.
tolerate your going after staff.
I don't even know why this person has a job
That's a
here.
discussion that you have with the city manager,
With
and I am
council.
not going to allow your continued attack on staff. Speak to the city manager who gave the assignment.
You.
Well, you can speak to me as well, anytime you
I
want.
am speaking to
Okay, speak to the city manager.
Think you are.
We
can't let
Yeah,
this
I'm
guy
the mayor of this city, and I control this meeting.
Control the city?
I
No, you
control
don't.
this meeting. Listen to the words. Councilperson Pontieri, do you have comments?
Thank you for the presentation. You and I had, an hour and a half discussion about this last week, and I appreciate you looking into several of the things that I'm concerned about. I mean, at the end of the day, I'll just give you, for the next time that you come to council, and I will tell you this is much more informed than the last time you came with the grant. I mean, we just had zero information really to go off of when that was before us previously. I want to know the need. I want to know the long-term ROI. And what is the actual need for us to do this versus when we look at over the next 5 years, what is coming to developments? what is coming from private companies that have been already approved, like the Wawa, so that we can actually see, okay, over the next 5 years, 20 charging stations are going to be installed in this area, kind of like the way we looked at the cell tower thing. Where is the actual need going to be? So that way we know we're not wasting taxpayer dollars, and we can possibly make a little bit of money off of these for our city, but also not interfering with private business. So in other words, if near, let's say within 15 mile or 10 miles within the Southern Rec Center, there's no projection of private industry putting anything there, then okay, yes, there may be an opportunity to both make a little bit of money and not interfere with private businesses. So I think that we need to be very calculated about this. And also looking at, in the city of Palm Coast, I'm sorry, I'm not really impressed with 500 EV vehicles. It just doesn't seem like a lot to me. I could be wrong, but it doesn't seem like a lot to me. So when I look at that number, I just don't see the need yet, and that's based on current figures. So I would just appreciate, and I know I've given you kind of a lot to follow up on, and I'm happy to have a meeting with you individually once you have a lot of this information, but I am not in a place where I can support this yet without those figures. I'm not taking it off the table completely, because we do clearly have citizens who drive EVs. But I don't want to cater to 0.2% of our citizenry with 100% of taxpayer dollars. It's not the right thing to do. So in order to get me on board with supporting this infrastructure, that's the data that I would like to see followed up on. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, Megan, thank you for your presentation. Very well done, very informative. But I, like Vice Mayor Danko, I would be concerned that we do not interfere with the private sector. And also, I agree with Councilwoman Pontieri. So I think that we need to tweak it a little bit more and come back to the table, and let's see what happens from there. Thank you.
Sure. Maven, thank you for the presentation. I'm okay with the 18% per kilowatt hour as far as the decision that I think is before us. I think some of us get a little carried away with the holistic view of this, but the 18 cents per kilowatt hour seems more than reasonable to see if there's lessens the intensity of the usage on the unit and see if those numbers hold up at all. To Councilwoman Pontieri's point, usage can absolutely, I could see this being dependent upon the price of it. So as far as I'm concerned, I think the 18 cents per kilowatt hour is fine. I understand the future landscape and the decisions that you made on the presentation to be able to show things. It's forward-leaning and it's forward-looking, and I think the decision before us now is to decide on what to charge for the unit that we have outside, and it kind of got outside the scope of that, but I'm okay with 18 cents per kilowatt hour, and I think that's reasonable.
I agree with that, and I also think there should be a 50-cent connection charge as well. I don't know what your position on that is, Councilman Clufus.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that. I'm sorry.
The 50-cent connection charge.
Oh, to plug in?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
totally cool.
So, Vice Mayor, regarding the current equipment that already exists, is there a consensus that the 50% plus the 18
My feeling
cents?
is that if we try it for a year and we don't make any money, we need to tear it out.
But you're,
I mean, because we don't have any
Okay.
numbers that are going to show us what we're actually going to do.
but you would agree with those figures of 18 cents and a 50% hookup to do the test? I'm just trying to give some direction so that we can make something
Why
from
not
what we
20?
have. Okay, so you're at 20.
I would be at 20.
Council-
Let's do the max.
Councilwoman,
Plus the 50 cents.
Councilwoman Hyder.
I really don't know that much about it, so I'm going to pass on that question.
No passing. So we have to give direction. So consensus is either you agree, okay, right now there's a consensus of 3 that 18 cents is correct and a 50% hookup charge. So either you can agree or don't want to agree.
I'll agree with the 18 cent.
So that's a direction. If you'll come back with us with all of the information that the members of council have asked for, and also please underline what I had asked you before. What I'm interested in, beyond the charger that we currently own here, is a land lease. Would be our only liability, let's say, or revenue source, and also the idea of a permit fee, which would be an alternative revenue source, which it's one of our strategic action priorities.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I'm fine with the 18 cents if that's the route we want to go, but I want a report back within a year showing us if we're losing money
Absolutely,
or not.
absolutely.
And that should come back within a
Or
year.
maybe not, maybe less than a year. In other words,
6 months.
Yeah, how about 6 months? Or how about update us in 6 months?
The land lease, it needs to be fair market value, not some sweetheart giveaway deal. All
that
right,
would
we're
be
not
us.
gonna give business a piece of
Let-
property.
Let's find out if anybody's doing it and find out what it would be reasonable, because that way we're not involved in the EV business. All we're doing is
Wanna be
renting land.
involved at all.
Exactly.
And we don't wanna be giving
Good.
people
You got
property
it.
use for free.
You got it. You got my point.
All right.
Very good. Maven, thank you very much for the presentation. All right, now, we'll now move on to item number 4, which is a ordinance, which I guess you'll read into the record for us, Counselor.
Yes, Mayor. This is an ordinance amending ordinance 2010-01, the special event ordinance, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Palm Coast, Florida, amending the City of Palm Coast Code of Ordinances, Chapter 28, Article 2, Special Events, providing for conflict, severability, applicability, codification, and for an effective date.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm Brittany McDermott, the Deputy Director of Parks and Recreation. I'm joined here by Jared Dawson, Recreation Coordinator of Parks and Recreation. But today we're actually coming to you as representatives of the city's Special Event Review Team, also known as CERT. We're going to be providing a brief background and some proposed changes on the Special Event Ordinance. So before I get into the changes, I'll let Jared go over the background.
So the original ordinance was approved by council in 2010. That's ordinance number 2010-01. And this ordinance was done to support events both internal and external. So outside organizations coming in wanting to host events, as well as the events that the city itself hosts. And it was also made to protect and promote the health, welfare, and safety of the citizens and visitors of the city of Palm Coast. So the Special Event Review Team, otherwise known as CERT, is comprised of representatives from different city departments, such as Parks and Recreation, Public Works, Fire, Community Development. Sometimes we bring in other departments as needed, and we also have outside representatives as well, such as the Flagler County Sheriff's Department.
So now we'll get into some of the proposed changes. I want to give a brief history. We have 2 slides that cover the changes. CERT did actually review the ordinance back in 2019 and made some additions and revisions that went all the way up to legal review. However, it was put on hold for being presented to City Council. We wanted to make sure we covered all of those changes that were made in 2019 as part of this process. The first one was adding requirements on event disclosure. And basically, this adds a level of clarity on when we need somebody to approach us with an event idea from an external group coming to propose using city facilities for an event. We were getting a lot of last-minute requests at the time, which was making it very difficult to ensure the highest level of service that we can provide. So we now have it written in the ordinance that we are asking for a minimum of 6 months' notice. This allows plenty of time to go through the full process and have time to promote the event so we can assure the highest level of quality and consistency. We also added some additional legal requirements for insurance for external groups to host events, and that has been added to the ordinance as well. And I also just want to back up and mention, I'm just giving a very broad overview, but the redlined ordinance was attached in the agenda backup that has all the details. But if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me.
I'm just going to stop you real quick. Just the 6-month number. So there are 6 other venues within the county. And I just want to know, if you check when you can, what is their time requirement for advance notification? I want to make sure that we're realistic in the 6-month timeline. And you know who I'm talking about.
Yes.
Hammock Beach Resort, Channel
Correct, yep.
Side, whoever it is. Just see what their requirements are.
We can definitely look into that and get back to you.
I just have a quick question about the insurance. Would they require insurance for the city and also for, like with us, with the land usage? Because it's required by the owner of the land that you're insured. So would the city be requiring additional insurance?
Right, so the organization would be required to have its own insurance, and then they have to list the city as additionally insured on the certificate that they produce to us. That way it covers both.
So that's
yep.
2 insurance policies.
So it's basically a rider that they get to list the city as additionally insured. Typically, they have their own insurance policy.
I understand that part, that the additionally insured, but I'm talking about there would be one for the city and one for the landowner.
So
But they require insurance also.
Right, so if I may, so the city requires we're required to have insurance on all of our facilities. So that just, no matter what, whether we have events or not. I think what's happening here is if someone were to come in and use our facility, they have to, one, have an insurance policy, and then attached to that would be a rider that names us as the beneficiary of whatever might happen.
I understand.
Is that, okay?
Are you asking, Councilmember Hyder, are you asking if a special event was held on non-city property, then requiring an insurance policy for the property owner if it was on a non-city property?
It's on a non-city property.
Yes. So, for instance, Central Park back here, there is a portion of land that is owned by a different company. If someone was to have an event, they would have to reach out to that company themselves, and they would have to get permission, one, to use the land, and then second, they would have to have insurance additionally for use of that land, since we, as the city, don't own it. But it is attached to the park. So there would be the city would be additionally insured for the event itself, but you would have to have a separate one just for that use of that
But
property.
there's two.
Yes.
If you were going to use that land, yes. Yep. And then the last section is clarifying on public safety. We do utilize, as Jared just mentioned, our Palm Coast Fire Department and Flagler County Sheriff's Office to provide safety and security for all events. So we added some additional language in the ordinance to ensure that that's very clear, that those are the resources you are required to use for your event.
I have a question just as we go through this. When I was looking at all the materials, I didn't see anything specifically regarding parking requirements and or people directing traffic for special events. So as we go through this, if that is worked into this somehow, if you could just point that out, what mechanism people are going to be held accountable for those, that would be great, because I just didn't see it in black and white, but it could be in some other reference or something like that. So if we come across that, if you could just point it out as we're going through the presentation, that would be great.
Kind of answered that now.
So the part that is included in the ordinance, that we do require events to produce a layout for their event, and that does include a parking plan. And then part of the CERT process would be them coming through, and we have representatives from Public Works that do traffic control, as well as our sheriff's office, and they'll make recommendations on if road closures are needed or traffic detours or additional assistance with parking. And typically it depends on the size of the event.
Okay, so, and I appreciate that. I didn't see the words traffic plan, I could have missed it, but I just didn't see it anywhere in the actual ordinance itself. So it might be something that before we actually, because this is obviously just a workshop, before we actually vote this in, I would like either council or you all, maybe in conjunction with one another, to make sure that that is specifically stated, because I would hate for us to deny somebody based on not having that, but they're kind of held to an unfair standard because it's not clearly stated.
Sure, we can be sure to elaborate on the section where it says their event layout or plan, that has to include parking and traffic as well.
That would be great, thank you.
Okay. And that covers the 2019 changes. The next slide will go into the current changes that we've reviewed again and made this year collectively as a CERT team. So the first one is adding a definition for a community event, which covers not-for-profit events organized by the city. Believe it or not, that did not exist in the ordinance before. However, the city also takes their own internal events through the CERT process. So we hold ourselves to the same standard that we expect from the external groups. So we needed to make sure there was a definition in there that covered that aspect. We also added verbiage to clarify the special event application process, such as required meetings. This is a process we already follow, but we wanted to make sure we formalized it in the ordinance by making it very clear so it's as fair as possible for the external groups that are coming in. They know their expectations, that there's going to be a preliminary meeting where you're introducing your event idea and talking through some of the logistics, and then a follow-up meeting that covers making sure that you have provided the event layout, your vendor list, things of that sort. And then there could be additional meetings required just based off the complexity of the event. So just really formalizing that and making sure it's clear in the ordinance. Another item is changing the parade requirements in order to explore other routes. And I'm actually going to read this one just to make sure it's extra clear. So currently right now it states in the ordinance that all parades held within city limits shall be held in the town center area. We are proposing to change this to say that parades are considered special events and must go through the CERT process and receive a special event permit prior to the parade. All parades shall have the route verified and approved for feasibility and safety during the review process. Certain routes are prohibited, including but not limited to routes along Florida Park Drive and Old Kings Road. The reason for this change is the city would love to bring back the traditional Starlight Parade. As we all know, it was on pause during the pandemic, and we went to more of a stationary aspect for the parade. We'd love to bring our traditional parade back, and we have started preliminary meetings with our fire department and our Flagler County Sheriff's Office to review the route that was in Town Center. At this time, we have found it's really not feasible or viable for the city's parade, and we are exploring some other routes. However, we need the ordinance to reflect that language to allow us to explore other routes. As our community grows and our city changes, we might not be able to always use the same standard route every year. So we want to build in that flexibility while still ensuring that it does go through the CERT process and is reviewed and vetted by our fire department, Flagler County Sheriff's Office, traffic control, to ensure that it is feasible and safe. Are there any questions on that item? The last one that's not specifically mentioned on this slide is the addition of farmers markets. It is not currently included in the ordinance language to allow farmers markets, and we have had some community groups reach out inquiring to be able to do so. So we made sure to go through and review all policies and procedures in having farmers markets and add an entire section to the special event ordinance to cover that and make sure that they're at the highest quality, safest conditions, et cetera, and that they do follow the CERT process as well.
That farmer's market's really important. It's very successful down at European Village.
Yes.
And I know they want to go to City Marketplace. There's a lot of businesses there that will come into that farmer's market, and it's surrounded by a lot of businesses at City Marketplace. So I think it's very important we come to some sort of agreement and ability to make this happen more frequently.
Absolutely. We agree they have a great community benefit. CERT agreed collectively on that, and we think that what we've added to the ordinance language really allows the
It'll
best
also bring in
case
tax
scenario.
dollars.
Yes. Yep. Any other questions on the changes?
Yes. What is the required amount on the liability insurance for the city?
So the commercial general liability insurance asks for $1 million for each occurrence and $2 million for a general aggregate policy. There are also some other items that cover motor vehicle insurance, as well as if you have employees working the event, your typical worker liability insurance requirements as well.
And that worker liability covers the city workers?
No, this would be for external groups. So if there were an external group that hired people to work the event, it's ensuring that they have their employees covered properly.
Okay.
The city already has its own insurance policy that covers any city workers working.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, that concludes this presentation. If there are no further
So
questions.
you move on to the next presentation now, right?
Yes, we are staying
So
with you for the next
I'm
one,
not
too.
seeing any additional questions right now, but I think the next piece of this will probably do that. So the next is a resolution, which I guess we would have to read. Wait, before we do that, so I do not know how many or the multitude of events that you all have organized so far, even just this year, but I think everyone up here on the dais would like to thank you, because I see the blood, sweat, and tears that, Jared, especially you, go through to make sure that every single one of our events has gone off perfectly. I've never, ever, one time heard from a resident that didn't compliment the city for the organization and the execution of an event, not once. And we do a lot of them. So before we get into the money, thank you very much. Go ahead.
Thank you for that, and most of that thank you definitely needs to go to Jared. He does an excellent job.
Thank you, Jared.
Thank you.
And thank you, young lady.
Okay, so I'll read in the resolution, amending resolution 2010-12, the special events fee schedule. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Palm Coast, Florida, amending resolution 2010-12 relating to the City of Palm Coast special events fee schedule, providing for severability, conflicts, implementing actions, and an effective date.
Thank you. I don't think we need to do introductions again, so we'll just jump right into the background. Something that is mentioned in the special event ordinance that we just presented is language that allows us to set fees to cover our costs for services that we provide, and that is set by a resolution. That resolution is number 2010-12 that we are looking to propose some changes to. So as you can see, it's been 13 years since we have implemented these fees and done any adjustments to them. This is our first time coming to ask for adjustments to those fees. In the first place, we want to offer city services to these external groups hosting events because we know that they are an amazing community benefit to our residents, and we want to ensure the highest level of quality and that there's consistency across the board, whether it's an external group hosting an event in a city facility or it's the city itself hosting an event. We want to ensure that there's that equal playing field. It's important that we charge fees for some of these services in order to recover costs. Many of the services that we'll go over in the next slide do attach themselves to a city staff member performing that work. They don't perform this responsibility during their normal day-to-day responsibilities. It does not take away from their normal work with the city. It is done on an overtime basis, so that's why it's especially important that we do recover some of those costs. So some of the fees that we're referring to or that we'll be covering are permit fees, which will cover your actual special event permit, as well as temporary vendors and business tax. Public works services that we briefly mentioned earlier, such as road closures, traffic message boards, directional signs, portable lights, anything you could possibly need to ensure safety and traffic flow for your event. And then, of course, security and safety services provided by the Flagler County Sheriff's Office and Palm Coast Fire Department, whether it be actually policing the event and having Sheriff's Office representatives there on site, or having a MERV unit, which is a medical emergency response vehicle offered by the fire department so that they can navigate and get in and out of an event in the event of an emergency. And Jared will be covering some of the process that we went about to identify these fees, as well as the proposed changes.
So we looked at some comparable municipalities, and the way we got these municipalities was one in proximity to Palm Coast, and then also comparable population. So we used the city of Deltona, Flagler Beach, DeLand, and Palatka to base our comparisons off of. So I wasn't going to go exactly cell by cell in this, but I wanted to point some things out. Flagler Beach, for instance, they try to make 100% cost recovery on the events that they host, so theirs looks a little different than ours, such as their fire and emergency services. They use an average of the nation's current industry norms, so that's the price of equipment and for staff. And they also have, depending on the size of your event, different application special event permit fees, and they also include in that their the 30% is a total cost of personnel and equipment, so what it takes to actually process the fees. If you notice, there are some things that we offer that other people don't offer as well, such as signage. We're a little more specific on what we offer for signage. We have a marquee board that's out in Central Park that shows what events are coming up, and we offer custom signs to get made to put on that, and that comes through our traffic department, as well as the digital traffic message boards that you'll see on the roads that also promote people's events. Any questions on this one? So the original resolution 2010-12 broke everything down. I'm not going to go through fire and EMS because it's extremely specific, but our event permit is $105. That includes our processing fees and the staff that it takes to process the application. And we were paying public works staff $10 an hour to do their overtime duties. And we didn't even have our Parks and Recreation staff listed on there, and those are the ones you see at the actual events doing the maintenance, cleaning. We offer trash cans as well, which we have the trash cans in the park, but if you have a certain amount of food trucks, for instance, you're going to need additional trash. We offer the signage, which is the temporary and permanent signs that are out in the Central Park marquee board, traffic message boards, temporary fencing, and portable light stands. Our proposal is to, one, streamline the fire and EMS to where instead of specific 2 persons per hour per type of device, it would be $50 per hour for the MERV unit, which includes the 2 people and the equipment that comes with it, and $100 per hour per the fire engine to include the equipment and the staff that comes with that. We wanted to lower our special event permit fee to $100 because that, when we compare it to other cities, is relatively the closest number. We wanted to change the public works staff and parks maintenance staff overtime to $30 per hour. Public Works, that's your traffic department who's putting out all the signs, programming them, picking them up afterwards, and also putting out all of your portable light stands and equipment like that. They have to do a minimum of 4 hours, so that would include the setup, programming, and tear down of that equipment. And the Parks and Recreation staff, like I mentioned before, that's who's at your event that day, making sure that nothing's going wrong at your event by policing the trash, cleaning the restrooms, providing minor maintenance if necessary. And they need to work at least 2 hours.
So quick question.
Sure.
On these events, fire truck and so on and so forth, folks don't need it, they don't have to deal with it, right?
Correct.
So if you're doing something like at City Marketplace, where you don't need a fire truck, you don't need this, you don't need that, just want to make sure we're clear on that.
So when every event comes through the CERT process, we identify the needs of what the special event is going to need. So if you're going to have a 5K, for instance, you're going to most likely need a MRV unit to be able to maneuver and get someone in case of an emergency, not necessarily a fire engine. But if you're going to have a walk around the park and it's going to last 30 minutes, you might not need any of these things.
Right. So that's something that's worked out during that process.
Yes, it's all case by case. The signage, we were changing it to get rid of the permanent marquee sign and just keep it temporary, because the issue is, if you have a permanent sign, we're going to have to make a new one every year anyways, because we have to change the date possibly. It might not always fall on the same date. The traffic message boards, we are looking to increase to $100 per event from the original $30 per each event. And we thought that that was a relatively fair price, because if you went to go out yourself and rent one of those, it's $175 per day. The benefit to that is if you have your event on the weekend, we will set them up on the Friday beforehand, so it provides a little bit of extra advertising for your event. With the temporary fencing, we are looking to remove the service for temporary fencing due to the fact that it is that plastic 4-foot-high rolls of fence, and they get damaged very easily, and it begins to cost us a lot more to replace that fence, because you can only repair it so many times, that it doesn't make any financial sense for us to keep buying it if it's going to keep getting destroyed every year.
Does that set us up for any liability, though, if we get rid of fencing? I mean, what was the original intent of having the fencing?
So some of the fencing that we've used in the past for outside organizations, they would use it as like a crowd control type device. And we're not saying that you can't get fencing. That would be on the organization to provide their own fencing.
Okay, so we're just not providing it as a service.
We have our own fencing that we use for minimal things for city events, but I mean, an example would be 4th of July, for instance. We just used, I think it was 400 feet of fence just to make sure people were not crossing the street from the high school going directly over 100 through traffic. We were just forcing them to funnel to the crosswalk.
Gotcha.
So that's what we're going to go forward and using fencing for.
And
So CERT could still determine that you are required to have fencing. It's just that the city won't be providing that as a service anymore.
Got it,
Yep.
okay. And is it, the last time these fees were looked at, is that in the resolution 2010, 2012, or 12?
Yes, the last time was when it was implemented in 2010.
Okay, got it, thank you.
Yep. And now we've evaluated them this year, and these are the changes we're proposing. Yep.
And the final piece would be the portable light stands. We currently offer them at $25 for each event. And we want to increase it to $50 per each event due to the fact that it is $175 a day from local rental companies, and that is without fuel. We will provide it fueled and ready to go, and they also act as generators as well. So aside from providing the light for an event, it also provides electricity if you need it as well. Even though the park has plenty of electrical hookups, this is just an additional source.
Should that maybe be on a temporal component rather than per event? I mean, it sounds like it's something that we could be losing money on. Are we pricing it enough to where we're at least, you think, breaking even?
So, do you wanna-
All
So
right.
we did look at the numbers. Jared has some of that
So
presented.
in the original resolution, we were averaging 31% cost recovery. This new proposed resolution will be at average of 51% cost recovery. So we were thinking, you know, baby steps, no giant leaps.
We want it to still be affordable for external groups to host events with the city, and being that it's been 13 years, we didn't feel like we could catch up all at once. The next slide does cover our process moving forward, though, on a yearly basis. So if you're comfortable, I can move forward and cover that. So we are asking to add this language to the resolution. This was put together with our city attorney to ensure that the language is correct and legal. It would authorize the city manager or designee to review the special event fee schedule each year and administer a consumer price index adjustment of up to 3% if the city manager or designee determines that increase in fees is necessary based on the cost increase to the city for equipment and services related to special events. So essentially, we want to make sure that this is more of a consistent and streamlined process each year, that CERT has a formula to look at and how we can increase the fees to ensure better cost recovery as we move forward. And again, that we're doing it incrementally and not all at once. And we have the CPI to look to help guide us in what those fees should be increased to. And also, not specifically on this slide, but definitely included in the resolution, is we would still look to come to City Council every 5 years to present the fees to make sure that you're getting a full and robust update regularly as well.
So a question, if I may. I don't have a point of reference. So in order that we not, and I appreciate the baby steps, so this is the purpose, this is my question. Did you do an analysis on what our total revenue on all of your events are versus the expense?
We have those numbers for internal city events. We don't have it today, but we could definitely follow up with you.
And the reason I'm
We could
asking
track
that
all of
question
that.
is, I would then ask you, not today, to, based on your experience having been through so many events, how many events might we lose? We're not going to attract more events by doing this, but we probably will lose some. So from, you know, a higher level, what's the big number? How many dollars a year are we bringing in as a result of this, and how many dollars are we spending?
We can definitely come back to you with that. And I do also want to say Jared took a couple different events that do typically come through our CERT process and what services they ask for or are required to have, and what those fees look like currently versus what it would cost them with this proposal. I think that might be helpful for this discussion as well.
If you'd like an example.
Well, for me, it's more about your judgment. I don't talk to these people. What I don't know is what would discourage them or make the service unavailable to them, because they all have different budgets. You know the people, you know who they are. So what I'm asking you is to guesstimate how many events we might lose.
Okay, we can definitely look into that. I do feel that if we were to try and go to 100% cost recovery, that would be very difficult for a lot of the groups that we do see through the CERT process. A lot of them are nonprofits. They're doing it for community benefits, and we don't want to make this too much of a challenge. However, we're also trying to find that balance of being fiscally responsible for the city as well. So, but we can definitely follow up with that additional information.
Questions about the ordinance as it's written?
Good job, thank you.
So I guess I'm a little concerned. I appreciate the step approach, and I agree with you, especially when we're looking at nonprofits and benefits, you know, residual benefits that aren't necessarily monetary that they bring to the city. My concern is if we're still only at 51% cost recovery, why not make the 3% CPI increase automatic until we get to 100% cost recovery? And that's just maybe a suggestion to my council members. I mean, 3% is a small amount, but, you know, we're not here to make money off of these, but, you know, city manager has a lot on her plate, so to add this is something to readdress, and then I don't know if it would take a presentation or if it's just within discretion, and if there would be, you know, a calendar alert, hey, look at the fee schedule, why not make it automatic every year until we actually get to that 100% cost recovery, because we're still taking it at a step basis, but we have an angle, and once we get to and it could be, we could find out that in 5 years, we're at a 90% cost recovery, so we'll do a CPI increase for the next 3 years and then, you know, readdress it. I don't know, you know, the kind of the granular intricate in and out of that, but
Are you willing to listen to their summary on who might drop out based on just this increase? Because I'm just concerned that there are those that work at a budget which is bare bones, and I'm just worried that if you build in an automatic, why don't we listen to if they say we're going to lose 10 events or 5 events or no events? And if there were no events, I would have no issue with an automatic increase, but I'm worried about the smaller venues and their budgets.
Yeah, I mean, I am willing to listen to that, of course. I think that there might also be some type of scholarship or, some kind of mechanism we could work in for maybe organizations that don't have the funds. But I mean, this is going to sound bad, but we're not a charity either. I mean, these are taxpayer dollars. So I understand that there are certain organizations that are on a tight budget. I 100% get that, and I want to continue to support what they're doing. And I think that that's exactly what our Parks and Rec team has done with this small increase. And we're still losing money in the interest of being a community, valuing community events. So I think that there's a balance that has to go into play. Am I willing to listen to what events might drop out? Absolutely, 100%. But I do want to kind of throw that suggestion out there for consideration as we look to implement this in the near future.
No comment.
Councilman Clufus?
I share the same concerns as you, Mayor. I believe in perpetuity increasing this, I'm more curious about who would fall off, and I think that is basically a list of events and something that as councilmen and women we have to decide the value of all these events. And right now I can tell you that the community events are phenomenal, and thank you not only Jared but to the entire team and everyone who goes into this. But yeah, I'm absolutely interested to hear those conversations, but I do see the value in everything. All these community events that we have, they're so fantastic, and they bring our community together in a bigger sense. So I appreciate the presentation, and I'm hopeful that we can continue to perform these services. And thank you for always being there. I've had so many events reach out to me to say, every time I ask, it's always so great to work with you guys, and that is, a pat on your back. So thank you guys.
And just
I do agree with Councilwoman Pontieri, but I also agree with Councilman Clufus. There's a balance here. We want events to come out. We don't want to lose anyone. But again, we just don't want to eat it every time,
Sure.
too. I think there's a responsibility towards tax dollars. So
Sure.
I agree with you.
Okay. Council?
Are you finished? Okay. I just want to point out that the way it's written, the 3% is discretionary for the city manager if there's an increase. So for example, for the lighting, you're already behind the board, right? So that would implement a 3% increase. But the application fee, we're putting that in line with other ones, maybe that wouldn't. But for example, the hourly rate for the employees, if there's a 30% increase across the board like you guys do.
Like a COLA
increase, then she'd be able to implement that portion.
Gotcha.
So
it's not a carte blanche.
It's not a carte blanche.
Got it.
It's if the increase for this service, and we're sending it at 50, just for the lighting, for example, but everything else is different. The hourly wage, I'm sure, is based on your average, what we have for workers now. So I think the way it's written now, the whole purpose of it was so we didn't get super behind, and that we would make sure we brought it back every 5 years, but we could make sure that the city manager could do some increases on things where we are a little bit behind the curve on, and not necessarily across the board.
Got it.
And just to close it out, can you tell me, are any of these events eligible to request grant funding from our grant or scholarship program?
So yes, potentially we do run the cultural arts grant process, and there are some events that
So if
do
somebody
come
was
through.
light, they could potentially apply there for that scholarship concept. Good. Okay, thank you. Any additional questions?
Can I just add, the reason why I was asking about the insurance is because I don't know if you're aware that the insurance policies for just one day are very high. So having to have two is going to make it even higher. And it's a pretty huge cost. So I think I would be concerned, like Councilwoman Pontieri said, because of insurance costs. There are some people that probably would drop off.
Yes,
So I'd be concerned about that because the events are very important. We have a great time at the events, but sometimes the cost you have to really take into consideration because insurance itself is extremely high.
Absolutely, that point is very well taken. And I just wanted to clarify on the cultural arts grant process, there are some restrictions. You can't use that towards operating dollars. It primarily has to be used for marketing, but it definitely helps offset some of the costs for your
Offset
event.
on the other
Yep.
side, yeah,
So
got
just
it.
wanted to
Okay.
clarify that.
Good, thank you.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, we look forward to your return.
Thank you so much for the discussion.
Next up, we have item number E6, which is a resolution, and I would ask council to read it in, please.
Thank you. This is an easement vacation for SK USA Palm Coast LLC. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Palm Coast, Florida, approving the vacation of 2 easements for the property located at 5622 State Highway 100 East, Palm Coast, being parcel numbers 8, 12, 31, 4300, 00000, 0010, and 08, 1231 4300 00000 0020, located in Palm Coast, Flagler County, Florida, providing for severability, providing for conflicts, providing for implementing actions, providing for recording, and providing for an effective date.
Doug, are you back there?
Good.
Are you good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just got to open. Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. Virginia Smith, Land Management Administrator. I'm here today to present to you on a vacation easement of 2 easements for the property on State Road 100. This is more of also a good safety feature as well for access and ingress egress off of State Road 100 with the landowners, and they agreed, as well as the Department of Transportation agreed, that it was a good way to limit the access to State Road 100. Of these 2 easements, this is a 220-foot, 41-foot wide ingress egress easement, and a 50-foot, 1-foot wide non-vehicular easement that they're looking to vacate. It was done during the development plans for SK USA Storage, and then they were partnering with the neighboring project next door. So everybody was in agreement that yes, these 2 can be vacated. This is the location of the 2 projects that are going on that is located right off of State Road 100. The 41-foot easement is located on the property known as SK USA, and then the 1-foot is located directly to the right parcel to the east. So the property, we requested the city when we reviewed the plans that they move the entrance to the east, and that would allow a shared access with the neighboring property, as I discussed. It would reduce the connections onto State Road 100, and as I stated as well, approved by the Florida Department of Transportation as well. So it's a safety factor. Are there any questions regarding the easement vacation?
So the vacation of the easement is in whose favor? The city, correct?
The city, yeah, most definitely.
Who's
We
building them?
requested it.
Who's building them?
The
Constructing those are turn lane, deceleration, acceleration lanes, right?
That's by the project itself, SK USA.
They're putting them in?
Yes.
But we will then maintain them, I think, for the future, I would guess.
I believe they're being maintained by the project as well.
Ah, okay.
So we're good. We have the easement to maintain. The easement is also for the safety of ingress for our fire as well.
Okay.
Our
And
fire
if
EMS
memory
as well.
serves me correctly, there's no sidewalk access anywhere in that area, right?
I don't believe so.
Right,
There's
okay.
going to be a sidewalk there as well because it's along State Road 100.
Right, okay.
Okay. Any other
Questions from city council? It seems like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, I don't have any questions, but I do want to commend Mr. DeLorenzo and Mr. Tyner on this. This was a business-friendly initiative. I think we hooked up 2 private partners, helped them save some money and make a project a little bit easier. So commend staff on kind of recognizing that and helping them in that process.
Thank you. Councilman Glyphis?
Thank you.
Good to see you, thank you.
Thank you. Have a
Next up is, I think, number 7, which is a discussion, and I'm going to ask Councilwoman Pontieri if she would like to lead the way on this. Unless there's another presentation I'm not aware of, I'm just,
No, I think
Offering you the
Mr.
stick.
DeLorenzo is taking a seat
Okay.
there, so.
Only to ask, I'm sorry, Jason DiLorenzo. Would you like the maps up?
What's that?
Would you like us to put the maps
That
up?
would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Acceptable?
So, as you all know, we have a multi-municipality commission that was put together to kind of help the surrounding cities as well as the county work together specifically on, just decision-making that affects all of us as we're so closely related and so many citizens traverse cities and the county, obviously unincorporated. I know the agenda for tomorrow's meeting, which Mayor, you will be in attendance with me at, is a little bit more robust than I think initially was intended for this commission. Initially, it was kind of a, hey, we've got a really high population influx coming to the beach. How are we going to provide for population control, infrastructure control, that type of thing? It seems based on tomorrow's agenda that it's kind of broadened in scope, but this idea was, I initially kind of crafted the potential of either an interlocal agreement with the county or annexation of Malacompra into the city because, well, for a few reasons. One, Flagler Beach, it can only go so far. There's only so much space, obviously, for people to go to the beach. And I know the county has recently made into a Park Bay Drive. I don't know if any of you have been out there yet. They've got a nice lookout tower, and they've built a nice boardwalk. It's still under extreme construction, but doing something like that is not my idea. My idea is simply to provide Palm Coast its beach. We have nearly 97 residents out of 130 Flagler County residents, and we don't have a beach for our constituents. Malacompra is very close to the city. The outline in red portion here is how we could annex it in. So the little L shape that is on the land side, not the water side of US 1 here, this is connected to the C section. This area that's in that rectangular section is Pellisier Flats, and we can't develop it. There's no potential that we can ever do anything with this. This is just simply how we connect to Malacompra Road. So it goes across, there's a parcel that's owned by the county there, right where you get to Malacompra Road, and then the kind of triangular piece where the star is, that's Malacompra Beach. There, right now, I think I said at our last meeting, there's a shower out there, there's a couple bathroom stalls, there's some trails, and then to Vice Mayor's point, there's horseback riding that occurs out there. My intent is to not affect in a negative way the integrity of Malacompra at all. In fact, it's to improve it. So improve it from a park standpoint. And I understand that this is going to have to come into our Parks and Rec kind of probably CIP to where we're looking long-term what we would do with this, but the annexation costs us nothing. So, but that's the first step. If we as a city want to have our own beach, and I think our citizens are entitled to their own beach. And I say that, I know entitled is a strong word, but we give the county so much money, and I think that this accomplishes a lot of things. It can help draw traffic away from Flagler Beach and into Malacompra, which is not frequented very often. I mean, I know I go there pretty often. I know Vice Mayor said you go there. There's never anybody there. So if we can actually turn this into a Palm Coast beach and market it through our Parks and Rec team, I think that that would benefit the citizens. It would probably help property values for the city of Palm Coast, and it would definitely over a period of time, take away some of that population that goes to Flagler Beach. I also know, too, from speaking to people, that they're kind of deterred from going to Flagler Beach right now because of all of the traffic. There's a nice parking lot out at Malacompra that usually has a whopping 2 vehicles in it. So this could really, there's 2 parking lots, and only one of them ever has 2 vehicles in it. So I just think that this could be a really good option for our residents. It could be something that provides relief to Flagler Beach and Beverly Beach, by the way, because Beverly Beach Mayor is extremely passionate about helping his city as far as population, traffic, infrastructure, all of those things. I mean, you're talking about 5,000 residents in Flagler Beach who are taking on all of the county's residents right now for beach access. So if we can help in that regard and provide our residents with its own beach, I think it's something to consider. I will tell you, I've already reached out to Daniel Anderson with A1A Scenic Highway. I've reached out to some representatives from the Hammock, just to kind of, I don't want to exclude anybody from this conversation. I don't want the residents who are going to be potentially, not initially by any means, affected by this, to be excluded from the conversation. And I want to ensure that the integrity of Malacompra will be preserved. But based on the fact that we have better parks in the city, we have a more flexible budget to improve the parks, I think that this could be a really good option. And if annexation doesn't work, at least we can maybe entertain an interlocal agreement with the county to where we can have some actual contribution into improving Malacompra.
Okay, so if I may, just so I can get up to speed here, because I've not seen this before. Help me, how do you get from the C section to the beach?
So you would have to take one. I mean, there's no other way to do it.
Yeah, but how do you get across the water? Is there water?
No. This is just the annexation. So what is that?
Well,
Have to go across the Hammock Bridge, right?
You would have to, you would have to go across the Hammock Bridge.
so I'm just trying to understand the map here. Where does the Hammock Bridge, you'd be going south to get back north?
Well, no, you would take the Hammock Bridge from Palm Coast Parkway and then
Right.
turn right onto one, and then that
So
would take you up.
where-
So I don't have a pointer.
Where's the Hammock Bridge on the map?
Jason, could you help me out here? Because I don't have the mouse to point out.
South.
I don't think it's on the map.
Right,
just a little
so you're gonna go south to get back north? I just wanna make sure I'm not understanding there's a bridge involved with this.
Yeah, it's down there.
Okay, I got it.
You know, the other,
Actually, so this one, I'm sorry, Mayor, this one is better. Right here is this is Palm Coast Parkway. Right, here's the
Yeah.
bridge, here's the Hammock Bridge right here,
And we're, okay, got it.
okay? And
Yep.
then,
And then the only other, let me put this lightly. Reaching out to the other organizations is certainly your prerogative. What I do not want to do is I do not want to project that the city of Palm Coast, as a city council, until we should agree, is looking to annex property from another municipality or certainly from the county. Interlocal agreement sounds much more palatable to me, but I just don't want to give the impression, because the press will have a field day with that, and I don't want to project that. Nothing, that's not a negative about the concept. I just don't want to send a wrong message.
I understand that, and my initiative in reaching out to those folks was to allay that very concern.
Okay.
And that Palm Coast wants to suck up a bunch of land and then develop it. That is something that I wanted to get out in front of before, I guess, leakage started to occur. So I understand that point of view, but that wasn't the intent.
What would happen to the homes on that road? Would they be incorporated?
No, well, I would have to talk to legal, I guess, about I don't really know, to be honest with
Houses
you.
on that road. You also have a community center. Hammock
community
Community
center.
Center is also on that road.
Yeah, so I know, there's
And then there's a sheriff's.
there's a sheriff station
too.
too.
And ILA may be, if you get to the same end game without all of the legal hurdles, because I'm not sure anybody's completely up to speed, but conceptually.
Well, I think if someone annexed the street I live on, they would be annexing my property
Yes, of
with it,
course.
right?
Unless it was
And
an
I'm not so
interlocal
sure the
agreement.
residents there would like an additional
course.
tax bill.
Of course not.
I'm not so sure that the folks in the Hammock would like the idea of us taking anything away from them. They're very protective over there. And there really is nothing preventing people in Palm Coast from using that beach. I'm not quite sure, I'm just not quite, I'd have to see a lot more to move forward with this. But I'm also concerned about the agenda that Flagler Beach has presented, which seems to be an overreach from where this thing first began. They want to talk about paid parking, they want to talk about homeless, affordable housing, lifeguards, so on and so forth. I mean, I don't want to see us create some sort of interlocal joint government here that is over the other governments we have. Lifeguards is part of a county issue, I would think, because we don't have a beach. Homeless, affordable housing, I mean, these sounds like Flagler Beach has some issues, but happy to share some thoughts with them. I just think this agenda is a bit more than we all thought this was going to be. And it's almost like I don't want to see us create another government over the county or Bunnell or us in this process.
Well, Vice Mayor, if I may, I want to address your comments for this first, and then I do have some insight based on the last meeting as to why these things have probably hit the agenda now. So, my concern about an ILA is that I foresee us spending a lot of money, but then, to improve the park, but then it's still county land. So, why are we putting more money into county land when we already give the county so much of our taxpayer money now? So that's my concern in doing an ILA. I'm not opposed to it, but I prefer this option over that, because I think that if we're going to, and we provide utilities to this area too, don't forget that. So if we're going to improve a park and make it something that is for our, that our Palm Coast residents can call its own beach, which I think there's some pride that goes into that, just like a lot of our other parks, that it is something that should be ours. Now, with regards to, I think that there can be some annexation agreements that also take place that, preserve certain things or address certain concerns of some of the Hammock residents. I do have a meeting at 3 o'clock today with a representative from the Hammock to discuss some of those concerns. So I'm not leaving them out of this.
Sure.
This is just hey, can we entertain this? This is not we want to propose annexation right now, and these are all the intricate ins and outs of it. This is just can we at least have the conversation? With regards to the rest of the agenda, I can tell you the lifeguard thing came up.
Okay, can we go back to the beach first? Because
Yeah.
the other question I have is, what about the road? Would we be responsible for maintaining that road?
And they just repaved that.
They did, so it'd be good for a while, 10 years or whatever, right?
Well, it's one road, but yeah.
But yes, but and if that road gets washed out during a storm, we're right there on the beach.
Did last
There's
time.
a lot of other issues to deal with if we get hit with a big storm. So I'm also, I guess, it's nice to say we have a beach. That would be wonderful. I love that thought, that concept. But what are we getting back for making all these improvements and everything?
The thing too is the beach isn't of great quality, right? There's a ton of rocks out there.
Oh, there's a ton
you
of
can't,
rocks.
You can't go
yeah.
swimming.
Yeah.
You can't take kids there. You can't just dive into the ocean, or else you will get crushed.
Got to be very
no.
careful in that water.
No, I know, and I've reached out to EPA on that. We can actually, I don't know if you've ever seen a lot of beaches that have like the rocks lined up in a row. We can actually relocate rocks, and we can move rocks up to the dunes.
And that
so
costs money.
It does. You're absolutely right. I mean, everything costs money, right? But we're providing our citizens, I think, a really good asset. And if we look at Plan Our Parks too, we just did the Plan Our Parks study, and the very top thing that our residents in the city wanted was more water access. And this is another way to provide a very cool and different water access to
And
them.
I'm not poo-pooing this argument. I mean, this discussion. I'm just asking these questions.
Yeah.
But nothing stops our residents, including me and you, from going to that beach already, which I use it because it's not as crowded as Flagler Beach. And there's nothing, I don't see any other than the pride of owning a beach. Maybe we get a little marketing push out of it, I don't know. But we're not putting businesses in there. We're not selling ice cream cones. I don't see any return on this investment.
Well, you could say that for any of our parks, though.
Right.
I mean, that argument
right,
could
but
be
why
made for
bite
any
off
park.
another park, is my question. We have parks and we spend a lot of money making them look nice. We have a golf course. I'm just not convinced we need a beach.
This is something completely different. So we have a lot of freshwater parks. We've got obviously Waterfront Park, which has been improved. We have all of those different amenities except for this. This is something new. So you can make the argument for any park that we have in the city. We're getting a feel-good benefit from it. It's not a monetary benefit. We don't charge to go on Lehigh Trail. So I understand what you're saying. Yes, of course it would take money to put into this to make it great. But you can make that argument with any park. Well, why do any park? So my point, though,
No. I mean, we are landlocked in that sense. We don't have a beach. It would be, we could be DeLand. They don't have a beach either. But I guess, again, the first thing that would be my concern, other than the expense, would be I'd need every resident on that road to say, yes, I want to be part of Palm Coast. because that's what
Well-
will happen.
Well, I guess my issue with that is we don't represent them. We represent the city of Palm Coast. So
Right.
I want to consider them, and I don't want to disregard anybody in this process. But I represent 97,000 residents in Palm Coast.
Right.
And this is good for them. So I understand there's a very small community of the Hammock who may be vocal, and there's 5, 6 people on this road that might be affected. And I don't want to exclude them. I want to consider them. But I don't represent them. So my concern is what amenity that we don't have in the city could we provide to our residents that would, A, help the situation that we're currently battling at Flagler Beach, and B, provide a really cool amenity to my residents here in
Well,
Palm
we're
Coast.
not currently battling anything at Flagler Beach. That's Flagler Beach dealing with their
No,
beach.
our residents definitely feel that. They absolutely feel, when you go to Flagler Beach right now on a Saturday or Sunday, you have a very different feel than you did 5 years ago. And I mean, that's, I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina. When I was 9, it was very different than it is now. So, I mean, that comes with population increase. But that also comes with not utilizing and maximizing other assets. Malacompra is not being maximized in the way that it can. And to answer your question about, well, our residents can go there now, well, you're absolutely right. But right now, we rely on the county to maintain Malacompra, and they're not doing it, to be quite frank.
So I agree with that, and I think it's up to the county to step up and do a little bit more work
Yeah,
out there.
but
And I
just-
can assure you, if I get elected county commissioner, I'll be focused on
So,
that, because
all
I
right.
love that beach.
All right.
Hang on one second, too, because they have
All
dumped
right.
so much money into the pickleball courts and the lighting. I'll be there at 6 o'clock tonight playing pickleball. They have put so much money into those pickleball courts and the community center lighting and the upgrades. Why would they give that up?
Well, so there's a lot of assumption making here. May I suggest this? So, valid point, good discussion. Since we are attending a meeting actually tomorrow evening, how about if we come back and report to city council? Because we may get a slam dunk no from the county. We don't know. And I don't want to sit here.
guarantee we'll get that right now.
Well, I don't know, and I don't want to sit here and make
One from the county
assumptions
about
on other governments. It's a waste of our time.
Mm-hmm.
However, the concept is interesting, so let us bring back the minutes and the discussion that is held tomorrow evening,
And
and
I'm
we'll
not
know a bunch
poo-pooing
more.
it.
Good enough?
I'm just asking
No,
the
no.
questions they're gonna be asking.
Yeah, and I don't want to try to assume, and let's hear what the other municipalities and the county have to say.
And I would guess the reaction from the Hammock as a whole
Don't wanna
is
guess.
not going to be good.
Let's
Well-
don't guess. We're going to a meeting tomorrow night to hear it, so let's hear it from them.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, I recognize that this is probably, I don't want to say, it's not an outlandish idea, and it's certainly not out of left field. It is different, but I just think that when we're looking at what we currently can offer our residents and the assets that we have versus what this could provide, it could be something very cool. I do really quickly, Mayor, just want to address Council or Vice Mayor's concerns about the other items on the agenda. So the paid parking and the lifeguard issues we were thinking about ways to expand where people go on the beach, and expanding where the lifeguards are placed was one way we thought that could happen, because a lot of people, especially those with kids, specifically go to that core area of the beach where there are lifeguards. If the thought was, if we spread lifeguards down further down the beach, perhaps that will help people to also spread. And obviously that comes at a cost. So I know that's the reason that was there. Paid parking, obviously, that's a beach issue. As far as the homelessness or the homeless population, I actually welcome this discussion, because only the county can do a homeless shelter. We as a city can't do that. Flagler Beach as a city can't do that. Only the county can provide that. So I think that, while we've got everybody kind of with a seat at the table, it is something to talk about. I think we can all recognize that we have a homeless population issue here, and part of that reason is because we don't have a homeless shelter. And by the way, the law says that if we remove, and Commander can probably back me up on this, if we remove any homeless people from a park or something like that, and we take them somewhere, we have to then pick them up and take them back after a certain amount of time. And our sheriff's office shouldn't have to do that. So until we have a homeless shelter, we have to kind of, for lack of a better phrase, just kind of put up with the homeless population that we have.
You're not
in
talking
certain
about a
places.
homeless shelter in Palm Coast, are you?
No, it's in the county. So obviously this is just, hey, county, this has to be something that you guys do. We as a city can't do it. So this is just an opportunity for the round table to kind of have that discussion.
Is Flagler Beach having difficult time with homeless?
I don't know about Flagler Beach, but I know Palm Coast is.
Well, because I mean, this is Flagler Beach's agenda, right?
Well, this
section
is a
here.
multi-municipality, but yes, Flagler Beach made the agenda.
And I think, you bring up the homeless, and I think that's a good point. I think one of the things we should be doing is educating our population, perhaps through signage or something, that rather than, give somebody money out of your pocket, donate it to this charity or that charity or something. We have homeless people because it's a good place to be homeless. They're able to collect the money they need on the side of the street, otherwise they wouldn't be there.
Well, I mean, we can theorize as to why we have homeless people all we want, but at the end of the day, if we don't have a shelter to actually take them to, we legally cannot remove them permanently from our spaces.
Right, and I know there's been discussions in the past about a homeless shelter, and we kind of ruled out Palm Coast, and I'm not sure where the county stands on that.
Well, that's why it's on the agenda.
Yeah, but the same thing with the expansion of lifeguard coverage. That's their beach. It's their deal. It's kind of like, I mean, if the county, this Flagler Beach has lifeguards on their beaches, from what I understand. The county does not. That's a county issue. Again, I'm just seeing this being more of a, like this creation of a new government.
So just to help a little bit, so the moniker for the meeting, it's no longer going to be held on Flagler Beach, just to help you.
Yeah.
So it'll be held at the GSB going forward at the county seat, just to take the Flagler Beach stigma off of this collaboration amongst the municipalities in the county.
I mean, I welcome it. I think it's a really good idea. To your point, Mayor, yes, it did start off, I think, a little bit more narrow as far as subject matter, but we are so closely related. I have, I've spoken to staff about this. Some of the decisions the county has made financially without us being at the table are a concern of mine, because so much of our taxpayer dollars go to the county. So I welcome these discussions and this agenda, and I think it ultimately can have a positive impact.
I agree. I think a good conversation is fine. I just don't want it to turn into a governing body.
That's
We'll
the
come
thing, is
back
that
and report the
decisions are
discussion.
made out
Councilman
of turn
Clufus?
Councilwoman Pontieri, you said something that kind of worried me. You said that this was all but a slam dunk at the county level. Who have you spoken to at the county level?
No. I said I can almost guarantee they're not on board yet at the county level.
Oh, that they are on board.
They're not.
Oh, they're not on board.
Yeah,
Okay,
they're
understood.
not.
That worried me.
Yeah, no. And I only say that because why would they want to give up Malacompra, right?
Agreed, yeah.
So that, I mean, I understand the hurdles, and that's why I'm trying to get out in front of kind of allaying some of the concerns that I anticipate. But I didn't say that it was a slam dunk. I said I can almost guarantee right now that the county, why would they do that?
Yeah.
So I get it.
Gotcha.
I commend you for thinking outside the box. Council, okay, no questions. All right, if there are no questions, we will report back on our discussion from tomorrow evening's meeting. With that, I will move to final public participation for today's meeting. Are there any members of the public that would like to address me or City Council at this time? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, councilors. Can you hear me here?
We can, yes.
Okay. My name is Richard Hamilton. I'm a resident of Island Estates, which is conveniently located just opposite the coast of Palm Coast in the Intracoastal. Normally, I just watch this meeting on YouTube and just to catch up with what's going on. This morning, I had to go to a 9 o'clock County Traffic Safety Committee meeting because we've had a few fatalities recently, and it's an important meeting. I figured that you wouldn't be still here by the time I came over. I commend you for your perseverance in taking the time to go into these issues. There are two issues that struck me just sitting in the audience watching. One was the discussion you had on electric vehicles. And I got to say I was a little bit shocked about some of the attacks on your resiliency officer, because looking at the issue of that, you brought her in for her skills in stormwater, flooding, resiliency issues. She was thrust into the EV issue because there was money available from a government grant. And it was important. There was a time certain aspect of the work she needed to get done it came to that, and she was attacked and things. But I think she's done a very good job now of explaining all the issues to you. And I'm sorry it just comes down to one issue of charging for your station here. I don't own an electric vehicle. I own a hybrid. I've had one for 20 years. I will be one of those 501 EV owners at some point because I want to do it. I think it's the right thing, and I think it's beneficial to me. But when I look at the advantages of doing it, its cost is a minor issue to me. It's the convenience of having places that I can actually drive, stop, charge my vehicle if I'm outside my range. And I don't want to spend half an hour in a Wawa station. I want to spend half an hour or more at somewhere I want to go. So that's a big issue to me, is having EV stations where I want to go. So I just wanted to make that comment that in support of your staff and what they're trying to do for you, and recognize that they're not pushing an agenda, they're just reporting to you. The other issue I wanted to raise was to hear more of your discussion on Malacompra. And I understand the issues. I don't know if it's a red herring in your part to push back against some other issues, to perhaps conceal the fact that you're building so many houses along Route 100 who are going to flood into Flagler Beach. They're not interested in Malacompra. But also, I'm sorry, just remember, you have agreements with the county that go back to the water wars, the utility wars of the early 2000s. I was here for that. There are agreements between you and the county not to use annexation as a vehicle on utility agreements. This map would create an enclave, and you're going to discuss it tomorrow. You will get a lot of opposition if you continue to pursue it.
Thank you. Richard, and thank you for your service on the CTST. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Mayor Gene Dowd and City Council. I'd just like to thank Jared. He left already, but I got to thank him last night, and for Memorial Day and last night. I'd never seen someone look up at the clouds so often last night to see if it was going to rain on them. I would like to commend the two speakers last night. Chief Berryhill did a great job addressing why we were there, and you, Mayor, about unity and the message you were giving. I commend you both. I was in Secaucus, New Jersey on the morning of 9/11 on the second floor of a building watching it burn across the river. And Chief Berryhill really explained it very well. I'd like to thank the City Council and the City staff. I'd like to thank all veterans. I'd like to thank law enforcement, fire, doctors and nurses that worked on 9/11. And again, thank you, City Council.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other members of the public? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon now. I just came up to tell you, I came in to sit in the meeting in case there was any questions. I know that this opportunity is not an opportunity to have a back and forth, but the letter that I sent out regarding the budget item, I cannot make the September 20th final adoption hearing because of my schedule. It just won't allow it. So I came to the meeting today in case there are any questions. I know the final agenda items, the City Council, City Attorney, or City Manager can bring things up. So I just wanted to let you know that I am here if there are any questions about that as we move into that meeting on Thursday for the road project.
So we appreciate that, and my suggestion would be, should City Council members have questions, refer them to either Council or City Manager to correspond directly with.
Although I'm glad you're here today because I read the back and forth. But I do have one question
okay,
here.
This is public comment.
But I just think though that we have an item of $750 million in a budget, and there's disagreement.
$750,000.
$150,000.
Yeah, it's a big difference.
Wish it was million. But I do realize there is some conflict here going back and forth on should that money be appropriated in that budget. So I guess I do want to know I assume the city has a right to do a road study, right?
So this is an appropriate question for city council and not for the opposing attorney?
Well, then I would like to know, since you're here and you have time on public comment, maybe you could dive into this just a little bit to tell us where we stand and where we're headed if this isn't resolved.
Well, I tried to be as clear as I could in my letter, but I wanted to make sure the history of the road project was kind of remembered. Some of us were involved with it from the very beginning throughout the whole process, and some of us are coming to it, now at this point in time. And everything has changed, including the assumptions that the original funding agreement or the ordinance was based on, as well as development patterns, your comp plan update. There's a lot of things that are in flux right now. So I try to focus on just that history. But from my perspective, the city clearly has the power to budget. I don't think that's an issue. I spoke to Ms. Borkett last night, and I think that's not really an issue. The issue is how the fund can be used and what the scope of the spend needs to be to avoid running afoul of that agreement, or I think even looking at a different perspective, does what we've learned since 2005 and since 2013, do we need to sit down with that agreement and see if it still makes sense as it's currently structured? As far as the budget is concerned, I think the city can definitely budget. I'm concerned about the expenditure part. There's two parts of the budget. There's the revenue and there's the expenditures, and expenditures is defined as the spending of money. So I believe the budget is authorizing the spending of money, and there's very little money in the fund, and what that money appears to, the proposal seems to want to spend that money on things that are not consistent with the structure of the agreement, which is to first pay the city off for the interfund loan, second plan and construct 2A 100%, then move on to 2B, not include town center obligations like Royal Palms Parkway extension, which is a separate obligation outside of the special assessment district. And so that's what I just want to make sure that we kind of understand that scope. Now, the 14th meeting should be a huge step in that direction, but because I can't make the 20th meeting and we'll be reporting what we do on the 14th, I just wanted to make sure to be able to answer questions since I dropped that letter
So
4 o'clock last night.
you'll be available for the city or for our council to transfer questions between now and that date, should you have any questions?
No,
Good.
and again, I would like to just get a consensus that our staff and our council work with Mr. Livingston and the SAD and try to resolve these issues.
So they have a meeting scheduled?
That would be great.
Great, very good. Are there any other members of the public that would like to address city council at this time? Seeing no one step forward, I will move on to discussion by city council members of matters that were not on the agenda. And if I will, let me just go quickly because we've been holding some folks in the audience for a very long time. Commander, just very quickly, you just want to let us know about something wonderful you guys have done?
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. Phil Reynolds, Commander with the Flagler County Sheriff's Office. Just want to report back to you in regards to our mission with the emergency response team. When the storm passed us, 12 of our deputies packed up their stuff with the team, brought our high water rescue vehicles and emergency vehicles, and headed over to Suwannee County, not only to assist to our brothers and sisters in law enforcement, but the community that endured quite some scenes there. So it was a successful deployment. They're back as of a couple of days ago. We completed the mission without incident, and it's not about just the neighboring cities that we're helping, but out of the other 66 counties that we have, and that's what we do. And I'm pleased to inform that they're safely returned.
Good. And City Manager, I'd ask you to compose a note from City Council that we could all perhaps sign off on, just to thank them for the extra effort, and glad that they all returned safely. Thank you, Commander.
Thank you.
Mr. Whitson, if I could invite you to the podium, and this is a little bit extraordinary, but Mr. Whitson's going to give us a very quick, very brief summary on the interlocal agreement between the City of Palm Coast, other cities, and Flagler County regarding the impact fees and their payment schedule to the school district. So that is a committee that you all have appointed, Councilman Kloufis and myself, to attend. I chair that committee. There was a request for a vote at the last meeting. I was unwilling to do the vote until we came back to City Council so that all of you could be aware. So I leave it to you to bring my my peers up to date if you could.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council.
The interlocal agreement between the school board and all the municipalities in the county was actually negotiated last year and not fully executed and adopted until October, so it's not quite 1 year old. In that ILA, it required the creation of 2 committees. One was the Oversight Committee, which is the mayor and Mr. Klufas sit on to represent you, and then Flagler Beach is on, the county is on, Bunnell is on, and so forth. And that's at the elected level. And then there's something called the working group. And the working group is staff. And I talk with your staff and the other municipalities' staffs weekly. I mean, there's not hardly a day I go by that I don't exchange information. We talk and prepare information. And under the ILA, Section 2.4 required an annual report to be adopted. And that was what was on the agenda. And since the ILA committee itself had been postponed to receive the Davis demographic report, we were waiting. I put together the draft report, which came from data submitted from your staff, City of Bunnell, the county, Flagler Beach, and then basically the mayor wanted to go bring it back to you all. You've seen a copy of it, and just get your input on it before he and Mr. Klufas go forward for the final meeting of the ILA this year to approve that report. So
Well said. If I could just add to that, that we were made aware that more current data would be available approximately when? Next month?
yes,
I'm sorry, when I say data on the school population within the public school district.
right. The state of Florida has a process for the Department of Education, and it's October, and it's our count, real live student count, second week in October. So we're still waiting on that. The preliminary numbers have us up about 225 students over last year. But again, it takes a little while to get things settled down, and the official count is the second week in October.
Right, and the agreement itself tends to lay out how prop share fees are paid relative to a planned growth in the school district. I'm not saying it perfectly well, but that's why the newest and the most current data could be important. So we will have opportunity to review that and come back and speak to you all on that information.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Councilman Klufas, do you want to add to that?
No,
Very
thank
good.
you very much for all that.
I really appreciate your coming over today to let us know that. Any questions about, have you all received copies of the ILA in the past?
I don't believe I've
And the
seen it.
ILA report was done in August.
With the actual agreement?
Yeah. The actual agreement was adopted in October by the,
So I don't know for sure if city council members ever received a copy of that.
okay.
Well, they got it with the agenda when they approved it.
So if you would send it out again
Yes,
to
sir.
each city council member,
Be happy
or
to.
send it to the city manager,
Send it
just
to,
so everybody has a chance. It's not that long. That would be great. I appreciate that.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Absolutely.
Any questions for us?
No, just look forward to continuing to work with you all. It's been a pleasure, and we just want to build the best schools we can and provide for our students and all of
Very
those
good.
things. So,
Thank you.
all right.
City council members' final comments today.
I just have a few quickly. I want to congratulate Lieutenant Klein on his retirement. 25 years in the fire service is quite impressive, so I want to thank him for his service and wish him a very happy and restful retirement of hopefully no shaving. I don't know if he doesn't like shaving, but I have noticed that many firefighters stop shaving once they retire. So I also want to thank everybody who contributed to a beautiful ceremony last night, albeit we did get a little bit of rain at the end there. Patrick Giuliano, also thank you so much for the bagpipes and his contribution as always to our events. Staff, thank you. Beautiful words. I second the public comment regarding Mayor Alphen and Chief Berryhill's words. So thank you all for that and for the opportunity to remember. The last thing I do want to do, I want to read part of an email from a resident, anonymously, of course, and with their permission, because I think that it's important to share with my council members. Obviously, it was only to me, but it does reflect a very common sentiment that I am hearing from our residents on a daily basis, and so I think it's important to share as we make decisions from this dais moving forward. It says growth is happening, and people will continue to move to our county. I don't feel as though we need to roll over for every developer, grant them the highest density so they can sell to a national home builder, and then leave town with the money they've made off us while we figure out how to fix the jobs, transportation, schools, and recreational demands that all these new citizens will bring. We have the assets as a county. Our real estate is a natural resource that they are mining. We have the right to ask for smart, thoughtful developments that will leave a healthy community for our future residents. This is from a citizen, taxpayer, business owner, and resident since 1981. So I wanted to share that because I do think that it's important that we never lose sight of the fact that our decisions directly affect every resident that we represent. And I thought that was a very thoughtful and concise email that directly reflects a lot of the feelings that I'm getting from our residents currently.
Councilman Clufus.
Nothing for Dave. A lot of thoughts on our behavior and how we acted up here today, but I have a hard cutoff at 1 o'clock, so I'll collect my thoughts and I'll save it for next time.
I appreciate that, and I'm sure staff does too. I'll move to council. Any final comments?
I have nothing.
City manager.
Only 2 minutes, council member.
Oh, no worries, you're good.
Just very briefly, I won't duplicate the sentiments of last night's ceremony, but very nice and appreciate all the effort that went into that from our staff. I seen them and actually attendees rapidly bring up chairs, and it looked like a full response. It was pretty impressive. But I also just want to close with an invitation to any council members to meet with me directly about our resiliency efforts and to understand the scope and charge that our officer has been directed to achieve. Many of those come directly from my office, so if you would like to meet, understand the full scope, I'd be more than happy to schedule it any time to discuss those.
Thank you. All right, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. I have a motion. Is there a second? I have a second. Adjourned.
Have a good night.
Counselor, a moment of your time.
Personal. Next couple of weeks.